Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 8th podcast today with myself, the Komodo, aka Dave, Mablack, aka Cody, and our guest today has been around for eons, since before the second generation Worms, is friends with Team 17 staff as part of interacting with the community side of things for so long, up to and including Andy Davidson himself. Welcome, Squirminator2k, aka Ben Paddon. It's nice to have you. Right, over to you, Mablack. Oh,
yeah,
that's good to know.
There we go. It's fixed. Sorry. Remember how I said? Yeah. So I need to mute my phone. I need to mute my phone now. Right. Okay. Sorry about that. Panic over. Right, Mablack, over to you again.
First 2 minutes.
We've done the same thing last time as well. That pesky Windows 10.
Yeah, that'll get you every
It
time.
happens. Was I muted or was everyone muted?
It was not me, just you guys, Mike. So
Okay. So anyway, so Ben has all sorts of involvement in the Worm series, and we're just gonna pick his brain about whatever comes to mind. We're gonna pick their brain about everything that comes to mind. And first off, how many worms have you killed in your lifetime?
It's got to be in the thousands at this point. I mean, I've been playing since the Amiga version of the original Worms. My dad got it for his birthday in January of '96. So I've been playing Worms for about as long as Worms has been playable. So God knows, I shudder to think, like, if I were to sit down and do the math, it would break me, I think.
oh yeah.
Indeed.
So the next question we usually come up with is, when did you start playing the Worms franchise, and which game did you start with?
Yeah, it was the Amiga version of Worms. It was January of '96. I still remember, like, we were in an Amiga household. When I was very little, we had like an Amiga 500, and then my dad upgraded to a 2000, and eventually we had an Amiga 1200, which was at the time kind of the state-of-the-art Amiga. Although I say state-of-the-art, Commodore hadn't really caught up. The PCs and consoles had kind of caught up with what the Amiga was doing, and the Amiga was now starting to lag behind. But that's the home computer that we had, so that's where we had our games for. Most of our games were pirated games. They were cracked copies that my dad would download from BBSs. And Worms was notable as one of the few original boxed copies of a game that we got. It was my dad's friend Larry got it for him for his birthday that year. And I remember my dad and I sitting down to try Worms for the first time, and the Amiga version had this training mode, kind of similar to one of the training modes in Armageddon, where it would randomly generate a map, and then you would just have one worm, and I think 2 minutes to destroy as many targets as possible, and then a target would appear randomly on the map, and you'd have to get that target, then hit the next one, which would appear elsewhere. And the first thing my dad did, and I think everyone does when they play Worms for the first time, is he aimed with the bazooka and then didn't hold down the spacebar. He just tapped it and blew himself up. And so the first time we heard that worm say "stupid," and we just kind of fell about laughing, and the timer ran out on the training mode because we were just laughing so hard. So that's kind of when I fell in love with the game, because it had that. Particularly with first generation Worms, it had this kind of very edgy visual look, but these very kind of rough but cute characters, and then just the sense of humor with the speech banks as well was, at that point I was hopeless. At that point I was lost. I was trapped. Hooked, absolutely.
I can second that. Not on the Amiga, but for me it was the Game Boy version. And just before we came on the stream, you had something to show me.
Yes, you mentioned the Game Boy version. I have a little I have a little shrine of sorts for some worm stuff. It's not as big as it used to be before I moved
Nice.
to America. But one of the things I did bring me was this Game Boy copy of Worms. Did you have this one, or did you have the one where it was actually the box art filled the whole thing?
I honestly can't remember. I just remember getting a Game Boy and I got Worms and The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. And those were the two games that I had.
What a cracking first two games to get for your Game Boy.
Oh
What a
yeah.
fantastic
Yeah.
double team of great games.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Weirdly, all my friends played Game Boy, when I was in like elementary and middle school. Nobody had Worms. Like people had like Super Mario Land and,
Yeah.
Kirby's Pinball. Did not find any Worms at the time. But yeah, as I understand it, I didn't get the Worms Anniversary Edition, but didn't they include the Game Boy version of the game like in that package? I think I heard that.
Yeah, at release it included the Game Boy Color version of Worms Armageddon, which is an interesting
right.
attempt to kind of shrink Worms Armageddon down into handheld form. But they're adding more games in January. There's an update coming that will add the Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo versions of the original Worms, and also the Game Boy Advance version of World Party.
Fascinating. I've basically never played Worms 1. I hate to say it as such a Worms enthusiast, but I am really interested to see if there's differences in like the different versions. I didn't even know it was released on like the Super Nintendo. That's like kind of mind blowing.
The Genesis and SNES versions only got released in Europe, so they never got. And in fact, a couple of years ago, Limited Run announced they were going to do a cartridge reissue of the Super Nintendo and Game Boy versions of Worms. And this was back in like 2021, I think, and they still haven't released the Super Nintendo version. And the reason being, and they just announced it this week, is because the European version, Super Nintendos run a PAL frame rate of 50 frames, 50 hertz.
Yeah.
Whereas the American NTSC console runs at 60. So there is the way that the program is. Name was Francis Lilly, I believe his name is. There's this kind of vertical blank of where the cartridge can load data. And if you're developing things for an American system, a 60 hertz system, then porting it to 50 hertz, that's fine. But because the 50 hertz is longer, it gives the console more time to load data. And the issue that they've had with trying to make an American version of the Super Nintendo version is because that V blank is shorter, so the game doesn't have enough time to load all the data it needs to load between frames. So that's been the reason why the limited run reissue of Worms for the Super Nintendo got delayed, and the way that they've solved is they're shortening the game time to 30 hertz instead of 60. So the game will run, but it's going to run noticeably slower than the European version. It's taken them like 3 years to get to.
It blows my mind.
It sounds like a nightmare.
Sorry, it blows my mind that there's even a Super Nintendo version. I never even knew that.
And here's the thing: it doesn't have randomly generated maps, and it doesn't have the ninja rope.
No.
Yeah, I mean that for me is like that's a deal breaker for me. It's one of the, but like on a technical level, getting the game running on the Super Nintendo, running on the Sega Mega Drive, on the Genesis, that it's incredible. The fact that it works, the fact that it plays as well as it does, even with those limitations, it is. I feel the same way about Worms on the Super Nintendo as the way that I feel about Resident Evil on the Game Boy Color, which did not get released, but it was nearly finished. If you play it, it is technically fascinating to play. It is not the ideal way to play that game, but the fact that they get it to work, the fact that it runs as well as it does, the fact that it is playable, and the fact that it looks as good as it does, those are all things to celebrate. Like that Super Nintendo version of Worms is a technical marvel.
Oh, it sounds
really
like it. Just while we're on the subject, because we've got so much time here tonight, there's a question in the chat that I would like Ben's opinion of. Yeah. So, Fishin' ZA, hi, I'm very keen getting a Worms game. What is the best one to get? What would you have to say about that?
In terms of accessibility, Worms Armageddon is not only the best version of the game currently available, but is also the most accessible. It's frequently on sale on the Humble Store, on GOG.com, and on Steam for like $3. But if you are a console player, it did just get ported to the Switch, PS4, PS5, and Xbox consoles. for about $20-25, and that has a ton of additional content. Like it has making of materials, the Game Boy Color version of the game, as I mentioned earlier. They're adding the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions. Worms Armageddon is the version that kind of the community has kind of glommed onto. So there's always people playing it. There's always people talking about it. And it's probably the one that's been most analyzed and picked apart. In terms of my favorite Worms game is Worms the Director's Cut. And there are only 2 ways to buy that right now because it was only released on the Amiga. So you can either buy an Amiga 500 Mini, which is like one of those mini consoles, like the SNES Classic. It has Worms the Director's Cut on there. It is $120. And the other option is if you own an Evercade, which is it's kind of a multi-platform. I don't want to say emulation machine, but they do like these cartridges that are like collections of games, and they're almost always.
I actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
When I was at Mental's house, I'm pretty sure we watched a documentary and it touched on the Evercade.
Yeah, Evercade is great. They do some good stuff. They have 2 Team 17 collections. One is Team 17 Collection 1, which has a bunch of their Amiga games. And the other one is Worms Collection 1 that has the PS1 version of Armageddon, the Game Boy Advance version of Worms Blast, and I think the Super Nintendo version of the original Worms. But if you have an Evercade cartridge with 2 slots and you put both the Team 17's cartridge and the Worms cartridge in at the same time, it unlocks Worms the Director's Cut.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That is wild. That brings me
so
back
much
to like
good information.
like that brings me back to like the days of Sega Genesis where like there was like Sonic. If you wanted to play like I forget what version of Sonic it was, you had to like
Sonic and Knuckles.
Sonic and Knuckles, right? You had to like plug in one cartridge, and then I forget what else you had to do. There's some magic ritual you had to like remove it and put in another cartridge, and then you could play like Sonic and Knuckles or something. It was
there's some weird stuff you can do with a Sonic and Knuckles cartridge where if you have a cartridge in and then you pull it out on one side, it does some weird stuff, or it lets you kind of hot swap the I forget the specifics. I was never a Sega person. I was always a Nintendo and an Amiga person as a kid. So
I was always a Nintendo guy. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it's the Sonic and Knuckles one's the one where it has the flip lid, or one of them has the flip lid, and you can put Sonic 2 in it and play Sonic 2 as Knuckles. I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I think that's right. Yeah. I love shit like that. That's
right. So, next question, my Black.
Okay, moving on. When did you first start playing Worms Armageddon, and who were you hanging out with?
So I came to Armageddon through as I think a lot of people did through Worms 2. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK, but I now live in LA. My dad moved to LA in '97, so he played Worms for a year and a half and was like, actually, I think I'm done, and immigrated. So when I came over to visit him when I was 13 years old, he had Worms 2 on the PC, so we played a lot of that. And sorry, Team 17, my dad burned me a copy of Worms 2 that I took home with me, and I played that incessantly. And then when
everyone has a burned copy of Worms 2. Every single person.
That's the rule. I did eventually end up buying a legit copy. I ended up getting the sold out software re-release in 2002.
I do have that. Not what you said, but I do have my Worms 2 CD right over there.
Very nice, yeah. But yeah, so I had played Worms 2. I had played the demo of Worms Armageddon, and then I decided I was going to buy it for myself for Christmas in '99. Walked into the game in the Luton Arndale Centre, saw that they had it for the Game Boy Color, and thought, well, I can. If I spend £5 more, I can play it on the toilet. So I bought the Game Boy Color version, played it for about an hour, and realized that it's not quite the same experience, and was kind of disappointed. So I ended up getting Armageddon. They did the first time I bought the PC version. Was they had just released the Armageddon collection, which was a combo pack that had Armageddon and Addiction Pinball and a Worms Armageddon screensaver that would it was a screensaver that would start an AI versus AI game of Armageddon on a bunch of pre-made color maps. And that screensaver is lost to time, but we do have it preserved up on on Dream 17, which is a Team 17 fan site I launched.
Ooh.
But where was I going with any of this? So I didn't stop. I played Armageddon. I got it just before they got rid of the requirement to create an account on Wormnet. So the reason why my online profile is Squirminator2k is because originally it was Squirminator, and I went to register that, and it was taken. So that's why that's why I added 2k to the end of my name. Yeah.
No way. See,
Squirminator was taken back in 2000.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think that's kind of
the
weird
thing,
because okay, everyone goes onto Wormnet, and the name that they come up with is Worminator. Just Worminator. Squirminator is a spin on that I don't think that many people would come up with.
Worminator felt too obvious to me. Like, I'm also a stand-up comedian, so I was like, your first instinct is probably okay, but your second instinct, that's the one you want to go for. Perfect. So that's why I went with Squirminator.
I'm surprised at that fact. That's really interesting. So that's when you got the game. Were there any people you were like hanging out with in like the early days of like Wormnet?
I mean, Wormnet, mostly I would just go in and join random games I didn't really like. I hesitate to say that I wasn't part of the community because at this time I was also writing for GameSpy's official Worms site. I was like their resident Worms the Director's Cut expert. But I didn't. It wasn't really until I want to say it was 2001 or 2002 when I joined the Team 17 forum. I think it must have been 2002 because that's when I started sixth form. And that's when I made friends with people like Mental, like Sergeant McCluck, like KRD, a bunch of people on the Team 17 forum. And that was also around the time that they had announced that they were doing Worms 3D, which at the time they'd announced as Worms 3, and it was going to be published by Activision. Thank God we dodged that bullet.
That would be wild. That's an alternate universe.
Yeah, isn't it?
I
mean, it still wilds to me that Sega of Europe became the publishers for Worms 3D in the end. It was Sega. Worms 3D was their first third-party publishing title. Like it was the first time they published something that wasn't, a first or second-party Sega project. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was an interesting time. I'm still friends with a lot of people on the T17 forum. There's a lot of people through them. I got to meet people like yourself, Matt Black, and Cyber Shadow and Dead Code, and a lot of people there who have kind of become instrumental in kind of the longevity of Worms Armageddon over the years. A lot of the reasons why we're still getting updates, we're still getting patches, the game is still playable. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I don't think it would have been possible for Worms Armageddon to have been ported to consoles this year if it weren't for the work of people like Cyber Shadow and Dead Code.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
So,
they've kept it alive.
Very lucky, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's a dualistic process. Like Cyber Shadow and Dead Code have helped keep the game alive, and then the community has, that's one reason the community has stayed around. So like that's why we've kept the game alive, and like the community and developers.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
It's a symbiotic thing.
Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
Just KRD asking, has Ben met Mental and Sarge McCluck in real life?
I've definitely met Mental in real life because we did a get together with a bunch of Team 17 forumers. We all met in the dazzling lights of Milton Keynes back in, I want to say, 2004. We met in Milton Keynes. We went bowling. I pitched it thinking it was Central, and it very much wasn't for a lot of people. That no one else pitched anything else, so we kind of went to Milton Keynes by default. We went bowling. That was a fun time.
Why do I recognise that name, Milton Keynes? That's been in a TV show or something, hasn't it?
It's been on TV. It's also a big city. It was also, fun fact, is where they shot Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. It doubles as Metropolis for some reason. It is Britain's attempt at building an American-style city. With kind of everything's on like blocks and grids, completely forgetting that Americans don't know what a roundabout is, but we very much do. So it's all blocks with big roundabouts in the middle of them. It's actually the city that I was born in, and we moved to Luton when I was 3. But yeah, we met up in Milton Keynes. The train station was a depressingly long walk from the city centre, which we learned the hard way. Yeah, a lot of it was very poorly organized, but we went bowling. We had a good time. And then the following year, a few of us met up. We had like for want of a better word, a slumber party in my apartment at the time, my flat, I should say, because I've lived in America for too long. My little, dinky little 1-bedroom flat in Luton above a kebab shop.
Classic English.
Yeah,
Above a kebab shop.
I got really friendly with that kebab shop. I just call them up and say, "Hey, I'm coming down." And by the time I got down to the kebab shop, my regular order was ready to pick up. It's great.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of ideal. You just like at a certain point, you're just like, "Hey, where are my kebabs?"
Yeah,
Ask for these
it's
things.
convenient. They did a great cheeseburger. Their chips were great. Yeah, there was a tiny little flat with. I was living with a girlfriend at the time it was not a happy relationship.
She's like, "I hate kebabs. I
was
can't stand this smell."
She wanted fish and chips or nothing, and the fact that we didn't live above a fish and chip shop, I think, it got to her. And
so this fueled your worms rampage, did it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, when it comes to Worms, like I took the day off work to play Worms 3D the day that it came out, and was disappointed. I had a good time, but it's like this isn't quite the same.
Yeah.
Recently, when Worms Armageddon came out, when the anniversary edition came out, I took that day off of work to stream the thing all day. I streamed like not all day. I ended up streaming like 5-6 hours, but
nice.
It was, you know, really, really good time. And yeah, that's me. I'm like, I hasn't been that way with a Worms game for a long time, I'm sad to say. I do eventually buy every Worms game because I'm broken on the inside. But it's been a long time since I was like, oh, this Worms game is coming out. I have to get it day and date.
It's kind of like it's kind of like the X-Files. Like, I want to believe, you know, I want to believe the next Worms game is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
That's typically not the case, but I've had fun with most of the Worms games I've played.
Yeah.
It's just that Worms Armageddon's at
it's funny
kind of a
that
high level.
people keep saying, "Oh, why don't they make another Worms game like Worms Armageddon?" And it's like, but we already have Worms Armageddon, and it's being updated. It's being updated.
They've made multiple games just like Worms Armageddon. One of them famously called Worms 2 Armageddon, and it's fine. You know, I think calling the second console version Worms 2 Armageddon, I think screwed up their SEO, because now if you Google Worms 2 or Worms Armageddon, you get all these results for a console version that you can't even play anymore. Couple that with the fact that when they did eventually release that version on the PC, they gave it a different name, Worms Reloaded.
Right.
I think the big problem with I love Worms. I love Worms. I think it's an incredible formula. I think it's a very versatile formula as well. I think you can swap weapons in and out. I don't think we need a quote unquote ultimate version of the game that has every weapon. But I think that the big problem with every Worms game really since Worms 3D. Worms 3D slowed the game down. If you play Armageddon, if you play Director's Cut, if you play Worms 2, you know, even World Party, the game has a fantastic pace. It kind of licks by fairly quickly. Whereas from Worms 3 onwards, it takes too long to do anything, and even the stuff which hasn't changed, like the speed at which your worm moves, the animation feels slower. And if the animation feels slower, the game feels slower. So I look at games like Worms Revolution and Worms Clan Wars, which have, you know, really smart ideas, like the water physics in Worms Revolution. I love that. I love the addition of like those little pools of water. I think that's really cool. But because the game is that kind of, you know, that 3D visuals but 2D gameplay, it's a very slow feeling game. The physics are slow.
I couldn't agree more.
The movement is slow, and I think that's kind of really slowed things down. And Worms WMD, I feel like is a step in the right direction, but I feel like where Worms WMD trips up is the amount of time between turns. Like, it takes too long for the worm to say something with a speech bank, and then it takes too long for the next turn to begin.
Can I just say I've
tightened up.
Yeah, I've been so like I'm almost done routing the speed run for Worms WMD. Like I've done basically every mission, gotten things pretty fine tuned. And like the number one thing we have to do is make sure the CPU can never take a turn if possible, because they take so long. It's incredible. It's like they will just sit there for 15 seconds and then decide to skip go.
Wow.
It's, and what we found also is like you don't actually need those pauses. Like I forget where we learned this, but like the CPU's behavior is they don't actually need to take all these pauses that they're taking. They just do it, and I think it's because Team 17 wanted to give you crafting time, because like crafting is the whole mechanic in Worms WMD, and you have to like do that while the CPU is taking a turn. So they wanted to, I think they wanted to like pad out the time to some extent.
Yeah.
And which is understandable, but it when you slow the game down that much, it does get really frustrating, because as a turn-based game, it's like, you know, it's already like on the slow side as far as games go. So you don't want to, I agree, like you don't want to add anything to that, you know?
Yeah.
That must be super frustrating as a speedrunner.
Yeah, so far it's, I mean, luckily we've found a lot of like 1-turn solutions and like 2-turn solutions, but it's like anytime the CPU gets a turn, it's like, oh god.
Yeah.
How do we stop this?
Hello to Orange in the chat, another old schooler. Welcome.
What's up?
So another question. So we had which Worms did you start playing? Or sorry, when you first started playing Worms and who you were hanging out with? Who were some of your first influences in Worms Armageddon? And did you join any clans? Did you do any clans?
There were no clans at all. I never really felt like I needed or wanted to join a clan. I just liked having a group of friends. All of the friends were in different clans, so it's like I didn't want to pick one side over the other. So I was and kind of still am very clan agnostic when it comes to Worms. I think the first people who really reached out to me in the community were and this is a name that might take a few people back. Kill Jaden, who was the guy in charge, or the person in charge of the official Games by Worms page, and is the person who reached out to me to say, hey, we need someone who knows about Worms the Director's Cut. Is that you? And I was like 13 or 14 at the time and had a very small website that just detailed all this incredibly specific information about Worms the Director's Cut. So Kill Jaden was like one of the first people who kind of like was like, hey, do you want to come join the club? And then just a bunch of people on the Team 17 forum. Like there were so many people that I can't, like, I think it would be unfair for me to like single specific people out, but also there are so many of them. But then there were people like, I think it was Bonds who ended up connecting me with a few other people. Like I used to do a webcomic called Jump Leads, which is a sci-fi comedy in the style of like Red Dwarf. It's like I describe it as Doctor Who meets Red Dwarf by way of Sliders. And the artist for the comic, because I wrote it along with a bunch of other people from the Team 17 forum, like Paul.Power, Were Mad, Andrew Taylor, a bunch of other people who are actually still kind of active on the Dream 17 Discord. But the artist was a guy named, and I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, so it's Jajar, it's J-J-A-R, who did a lot of Worms fan art back in the day, and he and I ended up working on the comic for multiple years, but I was connected to him through Bonds. Like I think Bonds really is the person who kind of is kind of the hinge upon which a lot of my community associations are attached to.
That's good to know. I remember Bonds.
Yeah, I haven't spoken or heard from Bonds in a very long time.
Were some of these people? So did they post Worms fan art on the Team 17 forums? Was that their initial like? Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, I used to post fan art on the Team 17 forum. I don't know if it was any good, but like, all through high school and college, I was doodling worms in the corners of my, the margins of my books and my textbooks, much to the chagrin of my teachers. I had what was very popular at the time, a Sig worm, which was my, everyone had like their modified like Worms Armageddon worm sprite that represented their character, and mine was, kind of a worm with half of the skin torn off to reveal the other half was kind of, robotic like Terminator style. My dad actually made a little model of it out of clay
Huh.
and
Oh,
gave it to
whoa.
me when I immigrated. So I have this that my dad made.
Oh my god.
And it just kind
You
of sits on
couldn't
my
put
desk.
that closer to the cam, could you? That's really
Um,
cool. Ah, yeah. I
My
see it
dad
now.
made this.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah,
That is
I like the
nice.
concept.
very proud of it. Yeah.
That actually, that's what a Worminator would be, or a Squirminator to take it to the next
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Cool.
So going back to the influences back in those days, what schemes do you think are the best that you enjoy, and what were you playing round about that era?
Oh God. I mean, Shopper is kind of evergreen. Shopper is one of those things where a lot of people don't realize it, but like a lot of stuff in Armageddon, it has its birth in the director's cut. Shopper was originally a cheat code, and it would
Oh,
replace the
never knew this.
landmines with weapon crates.
Ah,
So the
Okay.
map would spawn with random weapon crates, and then additional crates would drop between turns. Um,
I did not know
and
that. I thought
yeah,
Shopper came about a few years into Worms Armageddon. That's crazy.
there were shoppers like I think there's a cheat code in Worms 2 as well that was something along the
Mhm.
lines of Shopper that would make it stop raining crates during your turn. So Shopper had been around for a while. I love a good T17 game. If I could find a way to make it work offline, that I think that would be my go-to scheme for an in-person tournament. There is another scheme I like that was only on the console versions of Worms Armageddon, specifically the PS1 and Dreamcast version. That's called Clockworm Orange. That I was able to recreate for the PC version, and basically you start off with just like you start off with infinite Dragon Punch, infinite Fireball, and
Mhm.
a handgun, and then those are your entire weapons, and everything else kind of slowly unlocks as each turn progresses. So it's very much a slow burn game.
Hmm.
But it is one that I have a tremendous amount of fun with, and like some of everything is infinite except for some of the super weapons, which you only have one of. Yeah, that's one that whenever I play Worms Armageddon on the PS1 with my friends, that's one of my go-tos. I did try to introduce it to the community about 15 years ago, and it didn't take, unfortunately, but that's one of my personal favorites.
I guarantee it would have more chance of taking now because we've got all sorts of weird schemes. Like we had the Wheel of Fortune Cup where there was something like 40 schemes, like really out of the box schemes. Worm can't even pronounce it. Wormonopoly was one of the schemes, like a Monopoly based Worms game, I think it was. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, if we ever have a Worms Olympics again, which we probably should, we could always include a Clockworm Orange. I've never played it, but it sounds interesting.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know
KRD
if
remembers it. It was on Run's website.
Yeah, I could because I don't know if you remember the Worms Armageddon Page of Light. That
No, not heard that
page was
one.
page from
Maybe?
the very early 2000s, and it was a great resource because it was for a long time the only way you could just like she or they, whoever it was who created the website, had every sprite from Worms Armageddon and Worms 2 downloadable as a GIF in full. And for the longest time, it was the only place. And he's taken it down since. But
yeah.
he also outlined every single scheme from the console versions of Armageddon and broke down how they worked. So that allowed me to kind of to recreate the scheme for the PC version, adding the flame weapons that are missing from the Dreamcast and PS1 version, like the flamethrower. So, and the crossbow's gone on the consoles for some reason.
What is the crossbow not on the console version?
Crossbow, not on the PS1 or Dreamcast versions. It is on the N64 version, and the N64 version, up until Anniversary Edition came out, was the only version of the game that had the flame weapons as well. It's a sprite count thing. I don't know why the crossbow went, but I know that the flamethrower and the flames generally, napalm strike, petrol bomb, those all went on the PS1 and the Dreamcast because having that many sprites, like when you have a lot of fire burning.
Yeah.
I even remember doing napalm strikes on Worms 2 back in the day and seeing the screen start to chug. That many sprites on screen at once, there was no way for the PS1 to do them effectively, and I think they just didn't put them in the Dreamcast version for parity's sake, because the same team that did the PS1 version also did the Dreamcast version, and the N64 and Game Boy Color versions were by different teams.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's always been an interesting thing. Like the flame, even in just the PC version, there's like a limit to the flame count, I think. And there's always been this bug where, like, you know, you have some petrol on the landscape, and then if you fire a napalm, just because there's too many flamelets, it will like get rid of the petrol. But let's see. I guess we could move on to the next question. Let's see. So we talked about schemes, and there's so much to talk about with schemes. Well, I guess this is a follow-up question. Which league schemes or which schemes in general do you think are the most skill-based? Not just fun, but skill-based.
Gosh, I mean,
This will be interesting.
yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to I mean, I will be honest with you, I'm not as connected with like what a lot of people are playing now. I think Chaos requires a certain amount of forward thinking. Shopper is, I think, incredibly difficult to like strategize long term. Like you kind of have, for Shopper, you have to do everything kind of short term, so you have to be able to think on your feet. I think that's one of the reasons why I like Shopper. I don't know. I mean, for my money, I'm a purist. When I play online, I'm mostly playing intermediate. You know, I'm a very kind of out of the box person. I like variety, but I think that the initial schemes are very well balanced. Like intermediate and pro in particular, I think are incredibly well balanced. I think one of the biggest problems that Armageddon has as well is it just has a lot of weapons that are unnecessary, that are just kind of superfluous. And so I like the simplicity of the weapons set in Worms the Director's Cut. It's one of the reasons why it's my favorite. It's kind of difficult to get lost in the Director's Cut because like everything in that game serves a purpose except for the grenade launcher, which was the kind of prototype of the mortar. And the only reason the grenade launcher exists is because Andy needed another weapon on that first, because on the original Worms you have like the rotating weapons panel rather than having all the weapons at once.
He just needed to fill out the squares.
Yeah. So he just needed something to fill out that first panel on the weapons panel when you right click. So that's why the grenade launcher was added. And it's in the update. We'll probably get to this later, but he's doing a new update for Worms the Director's Cut that will be dropping in January, and he's pulling the grenade launcher out. Imagine Worms with no mortar. It's very easy to do because no one uses the bloody thing.
Well, yeah.
Oh, he's pulling the grenade launcher out. That sounded very interesting to me as well.
Well, I mean, the grenade launcher is this. It's just the same as the mortar. It's just the difference is that the first generation cluster bomb has more spread.
Yeah.
The cluster bomb on Worms Armageddon and Worms 2 is only really useful if you can do a timed fuse and make it detonate above someone. Whereas first gen cluster bombs, when it explodes, there's a lot more spread in how the clusters spread out. And in Worms Armageddon, there's not as much spread. It's not as useful a weapon.
A little trick that you might not be aware of in a fort match, for example, you do get the mortar, and you've also got 5-second grenades. If you fire a mortar, it'll dig a little hole, and you can fire a grenade with a 5-second, and it'll bounce in that hole and bounce back. So you can use it up as a sort of follow-up shot.
Oh, dig it, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
That is one thing.
Yeah, I almost never use the mortar or the cluster bomb in Worms Armageddon just because they're not as useful as they were in the first.
Every Worms game, I think they should make a Worms game that only contains the most useless weapons. So like, we got the mortar.
So Worms WMD. Sorry.
Well,
bad cough there.
We'd have the mortar from Worms Armageddon, the airstrike from Worms WMD, the fireball from Worms 2 Armageddon, because it's so easy to miss with that thing, even at point blank. Like, what were they thinking?
I've never played that one. Where can you even get it now? Can you play it on PC?
The PC version is called Worms Reloaded. Yeah.
Oh, is that is that actually? Is that sarcasm or?
No, that's legitimately how when they released Worms 2 Armageddon for the PC, they just called it Worms Reloaded.
Yeah, as I understand it, like I never played I played Worms Reloaded and speed ran that, but Worms 2 Armageddon, like I think there are like some really, really minor differences, but I never actually
Yeah.
played that version. I don't know.
It's just that
I think
Reloaded and Clan Wars are kind of like the wooden spoon games of the second generation, and it's just like I thought that was sarcasm. My bad.
Oh no, you're good. No,
Like, I thought it was a joke because it's
Yeah.
like it's they're so bad, or they're so known to be so bad that I
Yeah.
thought.
Oh wait, I wanted to add
Oh, no,
the
go for it.
Lucy from Worms WMD, which is
Yeah.
it's a little laser and it fires a bunch of little lasers that bounce off like the wall, but none of them do like any damage. Like they can ricochet and like randomly hit things, but it's like you can't aim it, doesn't do damage. I've used it maybe like once ever. Although I
For
like
my
the
money,
idea.
for my money, Worms the Director's Cut has the best spreader weapons. And it has a lot of weapons that became mainstays of later, like the Holy Hand Grenade, the Super Sheep,
Yeah.
the Postal Strike, Concrete Donkey. All of these come from Old Woman, Mad Cows. All of these come from Worms the Director's Cut. And then, because originally Team 17, Worms 2 was just going to be basically an HD version of Worms. And it was Andy deciding, I'm going to make Worms the Director's Cut. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to add new things. Is what showed Team 17, there's room to grow. There's room to kind of expand out what a Worms game can be. We don't just have to make the same game again with different graphics. That's a big part of why Worms 2 has all of these, iconic weapons, because they started off as, new additions in Worms the Director's Cut.
Interesting.
You just need to know. Those are some of the most iconic weapons. So like I think that is a big part of what makes Worms successful. Like just some of these iconic weapons, the sheep, the holy hand grenade.
Orange in the chat has said that says my favorite weapon of all time is Prod, which is a great weapon. I use that all the time. Little known fact: in the original Amiga version of Worms, which is the version that Andy coded, Prod is a hidden move. It is a secret move. It does not appear on the weapon panel. You can't select it with an F key. And the way to do a prod is you walk up to a worm and then you tap away, towards, like it's a fatality. And once you tap those, you don't even have to press space. He just does the prod. It's perfect.
That is immediately what I thought. That's like, is that not the move? Is that not how you do Raiden's hello there? Is that not how you do his move? Back, forward, or something?
His was back, forward, yeah. But I know that there's a fatality in the original Mortal Kombat, at least on the Amiga version, that was back, forward, fire, and I can't remember whose fatality that was. I think it might have been Sonya Blade's. I forget, but yeah.
That's
the
cool.
idea was that it was this kind of this hidden, secret move, and it does no damage.
Yeah,
but it's perfect for nudging a worm down. And this is the thing, like the one of the things that they don't have in basically any Worms game from Worms 2 onwards is there were types of randomly generated map in the original Worms, like the Arctic map or the Alien map that had lower friction, so your worms would slip and slide about.
Yeah.
So you could, as well as like pushing up a worm, it did end a turn. You are right there, KRD. So you could, it wasn't just about pushing worms off of cliffs. You could push a worm down a slope, and if it was one of those slippy, slidey levels, they would slide down. So you could push a worm into, just slide down a hill into a landmine, and they hit the landmine and bounce off, and then go into another landmine. It was a great way for starting all these little, chain reactions. It was perfect.
I wish Worms Armageddon had like some sort of secret code that you could do like that. That sounds very good. I like that.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, like a super hidden weapon, like. I think as Orange has said, I think the prod is better as kind of a secret move. The console and PC versions
that makes sense.
Just have prod in the weapons panel as a selectable weapon. Like it was never hidden. And I think that was a decision that Team 17 made rather than Andy made, because Andy was kind of
that's something that's
in charge of the Amiga version on his own. He would like the sheep was a late stage addition. Like he added the sheep near the end of development. So if he added it to the Amiga version, the teams working on the various console versions then had to figure out how to add it to that version as well. So that's why the sheep exists, is because it was something like Andy added at like the 11th hour.
That's crazy. Like the sheep is so iconic. Like we could be living in a sheepless world right now, but I'm really glad that we have the sheep.
Yeah.
Like what would even replace it? I don't know.
And nothing. I mean, the whole point of the sheep is it's, when you have worms, enemy worms who are dark siding into, they dig a tunnel, and the idea of the sheep is that you would send the sheep into the tunnel to blow up the worms that had dug this little nook.
Right.
That was the entire point of the
Well,
sheep.
they've tried other animals, and the other animals have not been as successful as the
It's
sheep.
very hit and miss, yeah.
I was thinking exactly what KRD just said in the chat. I was thinking that. I didn't want to say it, but yeah, Welsh people in distress to having no sheep. I don't think we need to go into the next question, but it was, were you active in any of the leagues like CL2K, Wackle, First Blood? But you said you weren't really a league player, but were you?
Yeah, no. I'm much more. I'm very. When I play online with friends, for me, it's like a casual fun thing. Adds to that the fact that I've never been. Anyone who's played Worms Armageddon against me online will tell you I'm not very good. I've been playing for nearly 30 years, but that doesn't mean that I'm good at the game. I think I've only really started to get good over the last couple of years. When I was a kid, when I played Worms on the Amiga, I would enter there was a cheat code. If you typed in total wormage on the menu screen, it would unlock the banana bomb and the sheep, the banana bomb and the sheep, and they would replace the cluster bomb and the dynamite. So I would unlock those weapons and then set everything to infinite, and then just end up using banana bombs the whole time. And I did that for years. And it wasn't really until my teens when I was like, well, I'm just going to start playing on the default settings, because I was doing that in Director's Cut, and I even did it in Worms. I think Worms 2. I love how much control you have over things in Worms 2, but it spoiled me because I almost never played with the default settings, and it wasn't really until Armageddon, and I've been playing Armageddon for a while, and it's like, oh, I should play the game as intended instead of just blowing everything up for funzos. And it just took me a very long time to kind of get past this idea of, well, I can't use the bazooka or the grenade because they don't do that much damage as when compared to like the banana bomb. So I'm not going to have a banana bomb. If I get a banana bomb, I'm lucky. I have one holy hand grenade, and I can't use it for 6 turns because it's on time delay. So I have to get good, and that's only really. I'm embarrassed to say that that's only really something I've been consciously thinking about for like the last 5-6 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's playing Worms like competitively. It's just very different, because I mean, typically you're going to be playing a scheme with like fewer like weapons like banana bomb and stuff like that. But I mean, it's fun. And you mentioned earlier like intermediate. That's definitely like become one of the most like skill-based schemes, and like I feel like once you learn like, okay, like grenade doesn't do much damage, but there's a lot of situations where if you just have a really nicely placed grenade, you can just like gently push a worm into the water, and you kind of learn like those the putt golf level like style of like, okay, I'm not so much going for damage. I want to spot every situation where I can just kind of like push a worm into water with like the right placement.
And it's wild because I used to play on the Amiga. That it came out in, I want to say 95, 96, kind of around the same time as Worms, but there was this kind of freeware like Scorched Earth clone called Frontal Assault, which I loved for a number of reasons, one of which being it was kind of similar to Worms, and you could load custom Worms levels from the Amiga version into Frontal Assault, which I thought was great.
Oh, cool.
And that game, because it's a more traditional kind of tank-style artillery game where you don't move, your tanks are kind of in the same position, you kind of have to get good at using the weapons that you have. So in that game, I would think about the strategy and picking the right weapons and everything. But for some reason, it took me years to take that and go, I should do that with Worms as well, instead of unlocking everything and, throwing holy hand grenades all over the bloody place. Yeah.
Oh, Frontal Assault, by the way, was that like you have stationary little tanks and it's just like, it's kind of like BNG?
Yeah, it's very straight BNG. There are a few like weird weapons in there. Like there's a weapon that's like a dirt spray because it had gravitational physics. So you'd blow a hole, and then if there was this little crevice here, that it would drop down and create a little pile.
You might know the answer to this. Nobody's ever been able to remind me what the name of this game is, but it's basically the same game you just explained, but it was on the Apple Macintosh very early. Can you remember what it was called? If I know it's a long shot, but
It wasn't Scorched Earth, was it?
I'll need to Google that. I'll take note and I'll Google that later. In fact, I'll have a
Wait,
look
Dave,
just now.
was this the one where you had old timey looking cannons and there were like trees and there was
No.
randomly generated?
I don't remember being trees in that. It was basically just like a line, and you had a little triangle on one side, a little triangle on the other side, and various weapons. That was it. Very basic.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I don't remember the name of it, but I remember that there was an Amiga version. I have very vague memories of playing that as a kid. It wasn't turn-based, right? It was a little bit more real-time.
I can't remember that part. I remember being addicted to that and another game called Glider, where you were a little paper aeroplane going through like a house or something. Those were two games I were obsessed with on the Apple Macintosh. But that was before I discovered the PC.
Yeah.
But it's just when you said that Scorched Earth and Frontal Attack, it was like that just sparked that in my... And I was hoping you might remember, but I'll Google that, Scorched Earth.
Yeah, I definitely remember playing something like what you're describing. I remember there being an Amiga version. Because it was very simple. It was just like very simple like line graphics, right? There wasn't like full sprites or anything. It was like vectors.
I'm not sure.
Honestly, can't remember. I just remember two cannons, it being like B&G, and I absolutely loved it. It was great. It was a great game to play at school.
You know, might be something to recreate for a 1v1 scheme in Worms Armageddon with a set map. You have one worm each. You teleport in on the spot. You lock it in. You pick a very simple set of weapons.
Yeah, Scorched Earth is a coloured game. If I can get that in my cam, you can sort of see it a little bit there. But it's not that. It's not that one. But yeah. Sorry, you were saying, Ma Black.
Oh yeah, well I feel like I've played that game. I played a bunch of black and white games on like my mom's Mac, like in the early 90s, but I don't know. But moving on, so let's talk about Dream 17. So the creation and curating of the Dream 17 website is said to have put you on Team 17's radar. Can you tell us about the website and your involvements?
Yeah, so doing the GameSpy Worms website, I provided them with all of the Worms the Director's Cut content, and then I think Kill Jaden and I think it was called Wormtopia when it finally closed. But the site kind of started to kind of dry up a little bit. I think Kill Jaden maybe lost interest, and GameSpy weren't, putting the resources into it. So I launched a Worms website of my own with the very clever and original title of The Worm Matrix, with the same movie logo, font, and everything. And I wasn't really sharing anything that people didn't already have elsewhere. There was no real purpose for it. And then I realized that there's no, other than Team 17's own website, there's no one on the internet where you can go to look at the entire breadth of Team 17 game titles, to look at their history and celebrate their history. So I made that. I made a little website called Dream 17. I coded the entire thing in HTML. Like, it was not, there was no PHP, no style sheets. Every page was an HTML page on that thing because that's what I knew. I was not, you're not a coder, not a programmer. But I made that, and I knew I was in contact with people at Team 17 at the time. And I reached out to Martin Brown, who at the time was, creative director at Team 17. And I said, hey, could I get permission to put all of Team 17's Amiga titles up as free downloads on Dream 17? And he said yes. So
wow.
All of Team 17's games for the Amiga and the CD32 specifically are available to download for free from Dream 17, including Worms the Director's Cut. You need an emulator to run them, and for an Amiga emulation is a little dicey legally because it's not just a case of downloading the emulator. You also need to have the Kickstart ROMs for all the different versions of the Amiga Kickstart. So it's, there is a legal Amiga emulation package that's fully licensed called Amiga Forever. and we provide links to that whenever you download an Amiga title from the website. We provide the link to buy Amiga Forever, so you can play these, because it's important. Like, these are games that have been largely forgotten by by the tides of history. Like, there are a few games I think people who are Worms fans probably know that are kind of Worms adjacent, like Super Frog and Alien Breed. But I don't know how many Worms fans out there are familiar with, Full Contact or Project X or X2 and things like that. So that was kind of the purpose of this website, was to kind of, provide a place for people to have access to that information. And it's become especially valuable now because Team 17 are basically scrubbed any mention of their legacy titles from their own website. If it's not Worms or
Why?
Overcooked or something they put out in the last 5-10 years, it's gone from their website, except with the exception of an article that they did to celebrate the company's anniversary a few years ago.
Could somebody put a link to the Dream 17 website in the chat, if possible?
I gotcha.
Excellent. Because I'm ashamed to say this is the first time I'm hearing about the Dream 17 website, so I'll be quite eager to have a look at that later on myself.
Yeah, it's every single Team 17 game up to 10-Minute Tower in 2016, which I guess was a Steam game. Although there's some more recent stuff, because they also are a publisher now. Again,
they do some other good games.
Yeah, Team 17 has a bunch of stuff. I handed off Dream 17 to a couple of other people, to Worm Matty and Soup Super, in the 2010, I want to say, and they did a pretty good job of keeping it up to date. And then for varying reasons, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. But it's still a very good place. It's still, I think, a very good resource for if you want to read about Team 17's titles, before Worms. And the kind of where they started on the Amiga, and if you want to play these things legally, those disc images are available to download. The CD32 versions are available for download. There are games that they published or distributed that they developed themselves that are no longer available anywhere else unless you go to an illegal ROM site or you go to Dream 17. Like, we were very, very fortunate to get that permission.
It's almost
That's
as
incredible.
if Dream. It's almost as if Dream 17's like a written documentary of Team 17's history, which is pretty cool. I'll be interested to have a look later.
Kind of the goal as well. Like, there's some there's image libraries there. We have various different versions of the Team 17 logo, from the original logo that they had when they were 17-bit software, all the way up to the current version of the Team 17 logo. We have, like I said, that Worms Armageddon screensaver that was included in the Worms Armageddon collection. We got permission to provide that as a free download. Dear Lord, if you can get it running on Windows 11, God help you. There's all kinds of stuff there. There's some add-ons for Worms the Director's Cut and speech banks, and we made sure that when they took some of the speech banks out of Worms Armageddon when they released it on Steam, I made them available on Dream 17 because I know that there are going to be completionists who want to retain that stuff.
Do you remember what speech banks did they take out? I can't remember.
So the speech banks that got taken out, I have it. I'm going to pull up the list here. I know Angry Scots got pulled. Angry Scott was pulled.
Oh,
is that just because of the name?
I think it's because he said this is pure crap. By the way, I think that's the reason why it got the chop. So
really?
Angry Scots, Jock, Rasta, Team 17 Test, and the Raj all got pulled. And with Rasta and the Raj, I kind of get it because they're very stereotypical kind of culturally insensitive speech banks. Team 17 Test, like, I totally get why Team 17 Test got pulled, because there's literally, when you collect a weapon crate, the worm says snatch, gimme more snatch. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think
Fair enough.
in the case of Angry Scots and Jock, I think it's just some of the language that was used, because they were trying to get like an E for everyone rating.
Yeah.
And I think just the use of crap in, which is
that's pure crap, by the way.
Yeah, it's my Angry Scots is my favorite speech bank, and I can't use it on the console versions of Armageddon because they pulled it out. It's not on the anniversary edition, even though I think
PC dominant race.
So yeah,
Master race.
if you don't have the original version of Worms Armageddon, those speech banks are not in the game. But I make sure that they're available, just like I said, for completeness' sake. I want to see what the ESRB rating for Worms Anniversary Edition is, because if it's T for Teen, it is T for Teen. So they could put those back in. They could put Angry Scots back in. They could put Jock back in.
Oh wow.
But they won't.
Damn.
It's not gonna happen. I don't
That's
think
too
it's gonna
bad.
happen.
I think like in terms of people requesting sound banks, like I think like when say Ruffled Bricks has done like various speedrun marathons, a lot of people request Angry Scots. Like people love that that big in particular.
Yeah, and it's one of my favorite things when it comes to speedrunning Worms Armageddon. Excuse me one moment. When it comes to speedrunning Worms Armageddon, unlike in some other versions of Worms, the amount of time that is allocated to playing that sound isn't determined by the length of the audio. It's just we play the speech bank and this file, we wait a second and we move on. So you can use whatever speech bank you want. Whereas with a couple of years ago, I spent way too much time converting all of the Armageddon and World Party content for use in Worms, the director's cut. So I'm not just talking about speech banks. I'm talking about color maps. I'm talking about like the terrain style. So like you can have a Worms 2 style hell map in Worms the director's cut, because director's cut lets you add your own terrains, which is great.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You've definitely sold me on this game, and we haven't even really got in depth talking about it yet.
Well, I'll tell you this, and maybe this is something we can do later. If Mablack wants to get set up with Parsec, we could do Worms the Director's Cut later. We could run through a game of Worms the Director's Cut.
Is that something you can do, Mablack?
I don't know.
How would I be able to show that on the stream?
I mean, it would be. I mean, usually when you do Worms Armageddon, you just join in as a spectator, don't you?
Yes.
So you would also, I think for this you would also have to set up Parsec, but you would just be an observer rather than a player. But we don't have to. That's something, if we want to do that at a later time where we can do something a little bit more director's cut dedicated. But I've just put the link to Parsec in the chat. I'm realizing I'm dropping this on you like midstream, and it's like trying to make that happen on the fly. We don't have to do that.
Well, what we'll do,
we could do in a later stream.
Yeah, we'll leave that till the end, because if I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that while the stream's live, and if I am, I might need to take away the window that has the cameras for a moment. So we'll try that towards the end, because that sounds fun. I definitely want to try that. KRD asking, so which happened first, Dream 17 or becoming friends with Andy?
It's kind of a chicken and egg situation, because Andy had reached out to me, I want to say in '99, because I used to have the reason I became the kind of the internet's Worms, the director's cut experience, is I had this crappy little website called Worms the Director's Cut Experience. Or it might have been the Worms the Director's Cut Experience.
The movie.
I was 13
the Worms
at the time,
the movie.
So, yeah. So I had this website, and I had like the story of how Worms got initially released. And I got a lot of factual. There was a lot of mistakes in that because I was 13, and I wrote a half-remembered version of what had happened. And Andy emailed me and said, actually, this is what happened. I entered this Amiga format contest. I didn't even get mentioned. I took it to Team 17 at a trade show, and they offered to publish it on the spot. So I got a lot of. So we had that, and then I didn't speak to him for 10 years. And then we kind of became acquaintances, because I know a few people at Team 17. Ashley Day, who is like their developer liaison and kind of their retro gaming czar. Ash and I have been friends since Stream 17. Ash contributed to Stream 17 back when he was a writer at a retro gamer magazine. But then I will be honest with you, the specific circumstances under which Andy and I kind of friended each other on social media is lost to time. But we've been chatting a lot over the last few years, particularly as he's kind of gone back. I'm a huge Doctor Who nerd as well as a Worms nerd. So he would, a couple of years ago, every now and then he'd like DM me and be like, hey, what's the, I've been watching this Doctor Who. What's a good, can you recommend a good Tom Baker story? Can you recommend a good, this or that? So I would make recommendations to him. And he always knew that I was the Worms DC person. Like I was, I not to brag, but if you've read anything about Worms the Director's Cut on the internet, I either wrote it or I am the original source cited for that article. Like that's very much the person that I've become on the internet. So Andy and I have been friends for years, I think, just because I think, he appreciates that I appreciate how much love and passion went into making Worms the Director's Cut. I know that he and I would talk about that. Like he wanted to work on this update that he's doing now for Worms the Director's Cut. He wanted to do it 8 years ago, and the only reason it didn't happen is because the Amiga that he had at the time was breaking down, and he just got it repaired, and that's lit a fire up his backside, and that's one of the reasons why he's working on this update now. But yeah, Andy's great. We've been working together on this update for the last few weeks. He announced he's doing Worms the Director's Cut version 1.5 will be dropping in January.
I can't resist asking, is this something that's going to be available on PC?
I don't know yet. I know the plan is to release it as an Amiga update first. I would love to see it get a wider release. Whether that's, it gets released as its own thing, or, maybe there's a possibility of it being added as an extra for the anniversary edition of Armageddon down the line. I don't know, but like, I would love to see it get a wider release.
Looks like I'm going to have to get myself an Amiga again.
Could be. I mean, even just like getting one of those little A500 minis, they're very easy to kind of mod into, or soft mod into basically a fully functioning Amiga. When I'm playing Worms the Director's Cut, I have an original A1200 down here. I have an A500 Mini. I'm mostly playing in an emulator. That's partially because of the work that I've been doing with Andy. I've been doing a lot of maps for the new version of Director's Cut, because one of the things that Director's Cut can do is when you do custom color maps, you can do a front layer and a back layer. So the front layer is the terrain, and the back layer is Worms Armageddon kind of has this where you blow away the terrain and you can see the soil behind it. Director's Cut takes it to the next level because it doesn't have to be soil behind the terrain. It can be behind the worms as well. So you could, as an example, you could do a house where you've got the floors of the house, but you can walk in and there's all the paintings and the wallpaper behind you. It's a fairly it's probably Worms Director's Cut is easily the most customizable version of Worms ever made.
Fantastic.
Even when it comes to things like sound banks, like when you do a sound bank on Worms Armageddon, you have bye bye and oh dear, and those are your farewells when your worm removes itself from play. The way that that's done in Worms the Director's Cut is the file name is bye-bye.1 and bye-bye.2. It isn't looking for bye-bye and oh dear, it's checking how many bye-byes you have. So if you want to have 5 different ways for your worm to say, for a thing for your worm to say before it removes itself from the game, you can do that in Director's Cut. That's not something you can do in any other Worms game.
That's impressive. I did not know that this was going to actually improve on the customizability of Worms as a series. That's really interesting. That's even something I've never even thought about, having a basically infinite amount of things that your worms can say. That's never appeared in any other Worms game.
And even stuff I think the Armageddon community has only really in the last couple of years started dabbling with making their own terrain styles, right? So you have things like hell and forest, and people are starting to use WormKit modules to add their own terrain styles to the game. Worms the Director's Cut lets you do that by default. It has a tool that lets you build custom what they call DIY terrain. So you end up with a .diy file, and it will just use them in random map generation by default. So that's how I was able to take all of the terrain styles from Worms Armageddon and shrink them down to 16 colors and add them as DIY terrains. And you can also do mountains as well. So they have their own mountains, they have their own terrains. I just downloaded it, but someone did a Green Hill Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog, so you can have a Green Hill Zone style terrain. If you have a big enough flat space, it will give you a loop-de-loop.
Dude,
Nice.
Nice.
The amount of the versatility and the customization on Worms: The Director's Cut has not been surpassed by Worms at all. At all. It's great.
dude.
I'm
That's
looking
that
forward
sounds
to
incredible.
this.
The custom we've been using the custom trains a lot playing Chaos, which is more of a like new-ish. I mean, it's not like new, but it's a newer scheme that's
Yeah.
really popular. Like there's I want to say like I mean there's probably like less than 100 like custom trains people have made in the past handful of years, but there's a lot. And it just playing on a terrain that you haven't seen a million times, it really can like breathe life into the game. It's just like it just feels like you're playing on something different. It's so much fun, and that's been like we've needed to have that as part of like Worms for a long time,
Yeah.
and I that's really cool. Like that, you guys recognize this is like such an important thing to have. I mean, yeah, if Team 17 ever makes like a new Worms game, I would 100% want that to be in there.
That's the dream. I think about what my ideal Worms game would be all the time, and I think my ideal
Mhm.
Worms game would be speed up the pace, get rid of the long pauses between turns,
Oh yeah.
make the game feel faster. Just like I said, the speed of the animations. When you look at how fast the worms move or look like they're moving in Director's Cut, in Worms Armageddon, it's night and day between something like Revolution or WMD. But also like par down the weapons. Like you don't need
Yeah.
60 plus weapons. I think you could easily halve that and still have a very interesting competitive game that still has a dangerous edge if you get like a super weapon.
Yeah.
I've done talks about. I did a talk at PAX in Seattle a
Ooh,
couple of years ago, where I talked about
nice.
how I think Worms is poised to be the golf of esports because a lot of esports
Dude,
is very
yeah,
very fast moving, but with
kind of is.
Worms in particular, because it is turn based and because it is all about you take your swing, you go for your shot, you see if you can get it in the green as it were. I think Worms is poised to be the golf of esports, and I think that the thing that is holding it back is that there isn't really a Worms game yet that meets all of those requirements. I love Armageddon, but even Armageddon I think there's too much of it, and it's not very. I think Armageddon is not very accessible to a new user. My nephew,
Yeah, I can agree with that.
plays Worms WMD, and I just as a gift got them Armageddon. My sister and my nephew back in England, I got them Armageddon as kind of an early Christmas present, which because I worked on it, so I want them to play the version that I worked on.
Yeah.
And my nephew could do the training in WMD because it's very like accessible for people who are playing the game for the first time. It is super accessible. It teaches you the controls. It teaches you about the physics. Worms Armageddon's training mode just says, "Here's a bazooka. Here's a grenade. Go at it. Hit the targets.
Yeah.
Hit the targets, idiot. Hit those targets. Why haven't you hit the targets yet? Oh, you've run out of time. You ran out of time. We're on the second part of this particular leg. Now you have to do all the training over from the beginning. Start again. Come on,
I
chop chop."
know
Yeah.
that is like yeah,
Yeah.
having to redo the training if you fail,
Yeah.
that is exceptionally brutal.
Yeah.
And I honestly
That's
like since I've played Worms Armageddon since I was a kid basically, so
Yeah.
it doesn't bother me. I just know everything. But
Yeah.
if I was to rewind
It's
time and like play Armageddon for the first time now, it would be kind of a nightmare, I think.
yeah, exactly what KRD said. It's like peak 90s game, and it's
Yeah.
like a homage to the you only get 3 lives in Sonic or Mario, etc. It's like overly difficult for the sake of, because I don't know, some people might say life was a bit tougher back then or whatever. But it's interesting that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think
Um
that if you had I think that the simplicity of the original Worms is that it didn't have a single player campaign. It didn't have a training mode. You just kind of
Mhm.
had to get on with it. The Amiga version had a kind of a training mode of sorts. Like I said, it would randomly generate a map and then drop a target. You hit it, it drops another one, and I like that. I think that was a good way. That's a good way to like practice with your grenade and your bazooka skills. But and kudos to Team 17 for acknowledging when they were making Armageddon that they needed a training mode. They needed something for new players to make it accessible, especially because of how big Armageddon was compared to the original. I think the simplicity of the original Worms is such that you kind of can just jump straight into it. In a way that you can't with the later games because of how many weapons there are, how many different things there are. I honestly think that the only reason why I say I would love to see Worms Armageddon become the competitive Worms esport is because we can't play Worms the Director's Cut online. I think that's because I think
There
Worms
is
the Director's
that,
Cut is perfect. It doesn't have retreat mode, doesn't have retreat time, not yet. That's coming.
Okay.
30 years late, Worms Director's Cut will have retreat time in January.
The problem,
Nice.
the problem with Worms Armageddon, I think, is it's the scope is, even when it was released, it was a huge scope. Now it's just boom. To a new player, it's really overwhelming because you start the game up and there's nothing that tells you the scope of the game. There's no guide, there's no instructions. It's like, here's a game, get on with it, basically.
And like I said, like I think that's something that Team 17 have really nailed with their more recent Worms games. Like everything from Worms 2 Armageddon onwards, like you got Reloaded, Revolution, Clan Wars, Battlegrounds. Even the weird Wii ones like a Space Oddity and Battle Islands all have. And WMD, of course, I think WMD has the best tutorial in any Worms game. It's just a shame that it's for WMD. I will say this, I rag on Worms WMD a lot. I think Worms WMD is a huge step in the right direction. I think the things I love about Worms WMD is it feels a lot more like, it feels closer to an ideal Worms game, in part because they went back to the Armageddon source code for the physics and movement, and I think it's a lot closer than any other Worms game that they've done. But aesthetically, I really like it. Not so much the Worms. I like that. I like the Worms having a certain amount of cartooniness. I'm not sure about how zany they made them in WMD, but I love
beady little eyes.
Yeah. I like the aesthetics of the maps. Like it kind of feels like it throws back to that original Worms aesthetic, where the kind of the maps and the world look kind of more kind of pseudo-realistic. I say that now like I'm not looking at a cartoon coffin behind me. I don't know why I leaned that way when the coffin's actually over here.
I agree.
But like
rip.
There was a texture and a grit to the original Worms that I think, as much as I love the style of Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon, that it kind of lost, and it kind of got softer until we get to Worms WMD, which again aesthetically I think is absolutely a step in the right direction. I think the thing I think people forget about the original Worms is that it's probably the last of the bedroom coder games, like games that were made by a hobbyist who then ends up getting that game published. Like that doesn't happen now. People, if they have a game that they want to make, they'll make it themselves and then they can release it on Steam, or maybe they'll get it released on on the Xbox. But you can publish your own games now on itch.io and GOG and Steam and what have you. So Worms is really the very, very last example of a game that was made by a teenager, again, someone in his late teens, early 20s, in his bedroom on his Amiga late into the night, right up until he took it to Team 17 and they were like, do you want this published? And the only thing for the Amiga version, the only thing they really changed was the graphics. Like they had professional artists come in and make better graphics, but the original Worms sprites are Andes. The original code on the Amiga versions of Worms and Worms the Director's Cut is Andes, and I think the original Worms then getting released on the PC, the Saturn, the PlayStation, the Mac, the Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo, that's punk rock. There's a real punk rock energy to the original Worms that, as it became more of like a commercially viable product, it starts to lose that edge a little bit. And I think Armageddon is probably the last game that has any of that edge left. Like Worms World Party is a commercial venture. That is Sega asked Team 17, Worms Armageddon is great. Could you make a version with online play for the Dreamcast? And Team 17 says yes, but we're going to make it a new game, and we're also going to release it on the PC and the PS1 because we like money, and that there's no money on the Dreamcast.
Yeah. So Weird Jack made a comment there, or Orange made a comment about, in his honest opinion, an ideal game for esports could take the experience from the Worms Armageddon community and officialise certain schemes that prove to be the most fun and competitive, with a built-in ranking system while still maintaining a sandboxy spirit to let people customise and innovate. Like,
Yeah.
I think
hard agree.
TTRR...
Good job, Orange.
Yeah. I think TTRR is one of the schemes I would most love to see in that. But I think the problem is there is literally thousands and thousands of maps. How do you regulate that?
Well, I think when it comes to maps, I think one of the strengths. I love map makers. I love what map makers do for things like cheap races and forts and what have you. But I think part of the spirit of Worms as a competitive game is the random map generator. So I think if there are schemes that require certain styles of maps, then you probably have, for want of a better word, tournament sanctioned maps that kind of Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 have their set maps, because those are the maps that the developers have made for the game. And you kind of, if you want to do something, a scheme that requires a particular map style, maybe you have a scattering of 8 maps that you use for that particular style. But I think the things that I like about doing run tournaments, I've typically done intermediate. So intermediate and BNG, I think are those are the ones that I'm personally interested in, and I think that those terrain styles work.
Glad you said BNG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Yeah. For those ones, you need random maps. Random maps are
you need random maps for those. 100%.
Part of it.
Yeah.
For that's, since we mentioned rope race, I've been playing a lot of Getting Over It with Bennett 5. That's one of the most speed-runned games that there is at the moment, and it's all just one map. It's like one course, it never changes, and yet people are still gradually improving their times. It's insanely competitive. So I feel like rope race could go either way. You could have just one really nicely designed map and everybody plays it a billion times, and that's the main thing. Or you could have randomly generated rope races, which even in Worms Reloaded, there actually were randomly generated rope races. So we know that's a thing that is not that hard to do. And we even have our own random rope race generators that people have programmed themselves.
Yeah.
For big rope race or just normal size rope race. And that's a separate skill, which would also be really interesting. You just click a ranked match and you just random rope race, and you just have to figure it out and play versus somebody. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I think that could be a lot of fun. And I think one of the things that the only thing I'm disappointed by when it comes to Worms Armageddon Anniversary Edition, other than, I say the only thing, the controls could be better. But the controls are pretty good for what they did, because they're basically taking the keyboard and mouse and mapping them to the controller. So this ends up becoming your right mouse even when you are aiming with a homing missile.
Okay.
So it's fine. But I think the biggest disappointment is
It's
online
fine.
mode kind of needed a ranked play mode as well. There's just one online lobby for each console. There's no crossplay on the console versions, but each platform has its own lobby, and there's no ranked lobby, and there's a ranked and friendly. That's what it needs. It needs a ranking system like the Worms games on the Xbox 360 had. They had ranked and unranked. That would have been nice.
It's a shame. There's Worms WMD still has ranked. I've been playing it a lot, and it's fun. It's simple. It's just one scheme. You just click a button. It finds you somebody, and I'd love to see that for Worms Armageddon. Even if it was just one scheme, that would be great. I don't even care. It would just be nice to have that convenience and to just because almost any scheme you pick, there's a way to make it competitive and have it get really interesting. And if a bunch of people are playing it, that alone makes it fun and competitive, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would really like to see more variety of schemes as well, but I think that's harder to do with a when you have a tournament setting. You kind of need things to be a little more locked in.
Yeah, that's true.
Checking to see if I had a
Oh,
Worms Director's Cut scheme for Armageddon, and I don't have one. I wonder if there's one on TUS.
yeah.
Otherwise,
Have you?
suddenly I got distracted. I apologize.
No worries.
Uh,
I was going to ask the next one. So, how much do you remember from the Team 17 forum days? You must have some stories.
I remember when they set up an open discussion forum, but only let a certain number of people access said forum. So you had to have been on the forum for a certain amount of time, and then it became you had to have a certain number of posts. And so the other people, it was this weird like tiered like kind of caste system on the Worms Armageddon on the Team 17 forums for a while, because there was like people who didn't have access to open discussion. It became like this conspiracy theory. Man, did you hear there's like an open discussion forum, man? Yeah, they only let the top brass access open discussion. You have to have been a long time member of the board, man. You have to know all the secrets, man. You have to have been here since the beginning, man. And so it just people got so angry about it, and you could get banned for revealing the existence of open discussion. It was such a hot mess. It was stupid. There's no need for it. But I think the idea was like, if you have, from Team 17's perspective, and I get it from Team 17's perspective, because they are a video game developer, they have to moderate this forum. They have a forum on their servers, they have to moderate it, and that's time and resources that get taken away from, making games. So it's easier if you limit to the discussion, and then they leaked it themselves. Yeah, that didn't help. But if you limit the discussion to we're just talking about our games, and you make any discussion of anything off topic, you can't do that. It simplifies the moderating process. So when they did eventually create open discussion, when they did eventually create open discussion, it was like, okay, we're only letting the ones that we know are good in because they haven't started any shit. And that's kind of, I think I get the thought process behind it, but it created this kind of better than idea. Like I definitely feel like there were people who were part of open discussion who felt like they were that they were better than the people who didn't have access. But I also feel like people who didn't have access, it was like aggressive FOMO. It was like there's a section of the board and I like being on this forum and I don't have access to it. And that's wrong. Yeah. I should have access to the thing I'm not allowed to see. And so it just created this. It wasn't fun. I liked being an open discussion. I think once that forum opened up, that was where I spent most of my time, because that's where, the people I'd been hanging out with on the forum for years, that's kind of where they congregated. And I think to the detriment of our interaction on the rest of the forum. I think it hurt more than it helped. I think if it had been my choice, we wouldn't have had an open discussion at all. I think it's easy to say that with hindsight, but I think open discussion shouldn't have existed. But there are people who wanted to take that into their own hands. Community members who are like, I'm going to tell people about open discussion. I'm gonna make these decisions for them. And I think that probably wasn't the right choice. It just whenever you have a forum, there's always forum drama, and there's no need. There's no call for it. Everyone has egos, and everyone wants to feel like, everybody does it. It's like Twitter. You don't want to be the main character of Twitter, and you don't want to be the main character of any forum drama that is going on. And unfortunately, Team 17 made themselves the main characters of their own forum frequently with a lot of their choices.
Good point. Didn't people kind of feel at some point like Team 17 was like shutting down discussion, but I assume it was more like you said, a moderation thing. Like it's just annoying and difficult to have to moderate like off-topic stuff.
Yeah, I do think that the Team 17, I don't think they were heavy-handed. I think sometimes they would come across as heavy-handed because of some of the language they used. Like anyone who saw anything, like Spadge, aka Martin Brown, former creative director of Team 17. I think that Spadge, when it came to the forum, I think he found it mostly annoying.
Yeah.
But I think that he tried to be diplomatic on the forum when talking about stuff, particularly forum drama. And I think that he often wasn't. I think he was diplomatic 30% of the time and undiplomatic the remaining 87,000% of the time. APJ was great. APJ was great. I loved APJ. APJ was one of the moderators because I think he was like the community manager for a while. His avatar when he was leaving was a little pixel art version of him with a suitcase, and when he left, I created an animated version of that where the suitcase kind of grew and then had teeth and just kind of chomped down on him. That was fun. I still have that somewhere.
Wow.
But yeah, that was a fun. It was when it was fun, and it stopped being fun. I want to say the release of Worms 3D kind of divided things, and then open discussion divided things even further. And then I forget when it shut down. I know that the Team 17 forum was still going. I moved to America in 2007, and I was still posting on the Team 17 forum for a couple of years on and off. And then I think they announced its closure. In like 2010, 2011, and now they have a Discord, and God knows how they manage that, because I manage a Discord right now, and it is, basically a part-time job.
We've seen like the biggest Worms Armageddon Discord is Sensei's server.
Yeah.
And we've seen drama crop up there too, all from like off-topic stuff pretty much. So it's just like there was some reining in of like the off-topic section, and yeah.
I think the biggest problem, and I don't think this is limited to Sensei server. I think this is something that the Worms Armageddon community has kind of had to deal with for the last, I want to say the last 10 years, maybe longer. And it's something that they kind of need to have a reckoning with, is the community really needs to look at itself and look at the people who are in the community and we need to ask ourselves, what type of community do we want to be? Because, and this is not unique to the Worms community. This is not unique to any long-going video game community, but I have seen some horrible racism. I've seen homophobia. I've seen transphobia. I think that the Worms community is not necessarily a very inviting or welcoming place.
Definitely second that.
Yeah. And I, as someone myself, like I am a queer disabled immigrant living in the United States, and I look at the Worms community online, and particularly on Discord and on WormNet. And again, Worms is not unique in having these problems. I think about StarCraft servers and Call of Duty and what have you, and it's definitely a gaming problem. But I feel the Worms community really needs to just take a second and. But the thing is, I do get that it is the same for a lot of online games. But then when you have community-led Discord servers and forums, and you have people openly, espousing Nazi rhetoric or being racist. And then you're just going, oh, well, if you just mute that person, it's fine. It's fine. I don't want to have to just mute that person. They shouldn't be here. This is not...
That's the... Yeah. That was the attitude from, the year 2000, when there was just, no moderation, and that's been, carried through all these years. And, one thing I don't really get is, people who just... people who are fine with that, it's it would be really, really easy to on WormNet itself, it would be really easy to just moderate hate speech in a more a simple way. It's you wouldn't be getting rid of anything. There are a few characters that I've seen on WormNet who really want that quote unquote freedom to be racist. It's
that's one of my biggest gripes about WormNet. There's the moderation is non-existent almost.
It's pretty much non-existent.
They have a word filter, but it would, you can't account for people spelling things in different ways, etc. But that definitely needs.
Hey, Mental.
Hello.
What's up, Mental?
You alright, Liam?
Hello. Waving at looking at the chat box in the corner of my screen and waving at it like you can see me. Hello. I mean, you can see me, but it's different.
Quite good timing. Quite good timing that, because he's actually in the next question, my black.
Oh.
Mental is, but
yeah.
All right. So Ben, rumor has it you were at the same Worms 3D event that Mental and Sarge McCluck were invited to, trying out the game before its release. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. No,
not accurate.
I do know a lot about it.
That's your fault, KRD.
Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, so there was there were a lot of people, like a very small, I say a lot of people, there's a very small group of people who were invited to what it's called closed beta testing, or focus testing, I should say. And there were a handful of people, I think Liam was invited, Andrew Taylor, who later went on to become one of the writers on Jump Leads. And they got to basically try do the focus testing for Worms 3D. And I remember, again, when this was announced, I don't know, like 16, 17 years old. And it's like, I need to get in this thing or I will die. I will medically die a death if I don't get invited into the focus testing. And I applied and I didn't get in. And I'm as shocked as you are to learn that it did not kill me. I'm still here today. But yeah, it's like, I
bet you're glad now.
Happened. I mean, here's the thing. No, because I really wish that I still wish I could have been part of it, because I think that even though I think Worms DC, sorry, not Worms DC, even though Worms 3D was not as strong a final product as it could have been, I think there are a lot of good ideas there, and I think that they polish it with Worms 4 Mayhem. But I think the biggest problem with Worms 3D, and this is something that they touch upon in some of the documentary material on Armageddon Anniversary Edition, is that one of the things that makes Worms so much fun is when you knock worms into worms and then they land on a landmine and then they bounce off and then they slide down a hill and go into, and you lose that in 3D. And they try, the developers tried to cheat it a little way, like they have the worms kind of being magnetized to each other a little bit so that worms would fly into each other, but you don't get as much of that, like, you don't get as much of that, you know, that chaos and that kind of
pool ball action.
Yeah, as someone who I picked up the Worms board game recently, and as complicated as that game is, it does try to capture that kind of ricochet, cause and effect, things blowing up into other things kind of action that the 2D game has. And God bless them for trying with the 3D.
Yeah.
Again, there are bits of 3D that I really like, but I think Worms 3D is essentially a turn-based first-person shooter. And it's not to say it's a bad game, but it's not quite Worms.
It's not quite Worms to me either.
If
I might be in the same. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if I want to play Worms 3D, I play Hogs of War. I love that game.
Hogs of War is fun, and I think, I mean, the story of why Hogs of War exists is connected to Worms, and it's bonkers.
Well, we need to hear that then.
Okay, well, here you go. So it's 1996, and Team 17 have signed with Microprose to publish. I think Worms United was published through Microprose, and Worms 2 was published through Microprose. And then Microprose after the phenomenal success of Worms 2, Microprose approaches Team 17 and say, "Great, good job. So obviously now you're going to do a 3D one." And Team 17 says, "Not just now. We're going to wait a little bit." Because it's not time, the technology isn't there. And the Microprose goes, "Cool, so we own Worms now. So we're just going to make our own." And they start work internally on a 3D Worms game. And Team 17 have to threaten legal action. I don't know how far that got. But the reason why Hogs of War exists is because Microprose, which then kind of got folded into Infogrames, basically took what the work they had been doing on their Worms 3D, and it became Hogs of War.
Okay.
Never
I didn't
knew
know
that
at all. I've been meaning to play Hogs of War at some point.
I love that game.
It's not a bad game. I recently bought the PC version on GOG.com because it is on GOG.com. It doesn't work. So
I think I heard that. Yeah.
Just play the PS1 version. It's fine.
Right. Wasn't there some problem with like the CPU like not behaving right or something?
It doesn't know what to do with a dual core or quad core system, I think. Kind of like the PC version of Silent Hill 2 out of the box. The original Silent Hill 2, not the remake, doesn't know what to do if you have more than one processor, so it just doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And there are fan patches for that. I don't know if there are any fan patches for Hogs of War. I should look into that. But the PS1 version emulates beautifully. That's the one I played the most of as a kid anyway. But I like ports. I don't know if you knew this about me. I'm a huge ports aficionado. So I definitely, like, during the 90s and the 2000s, would buy a game for multiple systems because I wanted to see how it translated from, like, how does this PS1 game translate to the PC? How does this Amiga game translate to the, the Sega Saturn or whatever? So that's why I ended up buying Hogs of War on the PC cheap because I got the PS1 version. I got in a bundle with Armageddon, Worms Pinball and Hogs of War. It was like a best of Infogrames pack. That I bought
Nice.
a game in like 2002, I want to say. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. I guess like yeah, turning the worms into pigs is a way of avoiding legal action.
Yeah.
We can say that much.
Arguably
It does
easier
make
to
you.
animate because they've got 2 arms and 2 legs, so you don't have to worry about
Oh
making
yeah,
them
yeah.
move in a wormy way. Yeah.
True. I do
Um,
agree with your assessment before of like I played Worms 3D for like an hour and never played it again, to be honest. Maybe that'll change, but I do agree like the knocking into Worms mechanic is so crucial, and I think it's just the fact that in 3D there's more empty space. So you're
Yeah.
less likely to bump into another worm, and you can't really
Yeah.
fix that. It's just inherent to
Yeah.
it being 3D. Even if you make the worms large, and they are somewhat large in Worms 3D,
Yeah.
but it's just you're not going to get that same knockback that we
Yeah.
love.
And God bless them, I think they focus so much on trying to solve the deforming terrain, destructive terrain problem.
That's
And the
really
solution
hard,
they
yeah.
came up with, like, I love the solution they came up with Worms 3D to get that working on like the PS2 and the GameCube and the Xbox. Like, as you said, it's just too spread out. And particularly with Worms 3D, you have these kind of floating islands, and the solution that they came up with for Worms 4 Mayhem was a combination of like those voxel objects from Worms 3D, but also a deformable height map, kind of like Hogs of War used a height map, but it wasn't deformable. So the you have the height map for the kind of the terrain, and then you have these objects and islands and that are kind of randomly scattered around the map. And I think that was an elegant solution. I think that's a lot better than just kind of doing the floating islands thing that they did for Worms 3D. But yeah, just Worms in 3D doesn't work because you don't get that kind of chaotic cause and effect that you get with the 2D games.
yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that.
So
And-
on you go.
oh, well, I was gonna say like, frankly, I don't even understand how it's possible to get destructible terrain in 3D in like a perfect way. I don't know if there is like a perfect way to do it that doesn't cost insane amounts of resources. Because in 2D, I understand
Yeah.
you just remove the pixels. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's that's one reason I've always loved 2D more, because you know exactly
Yeah.
what's gonna happen. It's like, okay, these pixels are gonna be gone once you blow part of the land up.
Yeah.
In 3D,
And I
there,
think,
I assume there's
yeah.
always going to be some compromise where it's like it's not perfect.
Yeah, and there were some interesting ideas from the 3D games that kind of ended up going back into the 2D games, like the turrets, for example, the magnets. These are all things that I think kind of started out in 3D and then kind of found life in later 2D games. I think the biggest impact that the 3D Worms games had on Worms as a whole is slowing the whole game down. Or making the game feel slower. The 2D games have not felt fast since, Worms 2 Armageddon World Party. But yeah, I think the way that they did the 3D,
You're
they
right.
did those kind of they did this combined polygon voxel system for the 3D games that they called voxels. And I think,
Remember that word.
you could probably scale that down to have kind of more like micro deformable terrain with modern systems. But yeah, I think it was a tricky thing to nail with that generation of games consoles. And I think you could do it now, but I think that the community has very clearly moved on from 3D Worms.
Oh yeah.
I don't
I
think
mean,
there's a pull for it.
I don't think
Yeah.
there's much of a demand. We have seen
Yeah.
some people interested in like speedrunning the Worms 3D games. It's fewer than like I guess the us 2D people, but I guess they're out there. There's people who really love the Worms 3D games.
Mm.
God bless them. But yeah,
Well,
I
any game has its following,
yeah. I think
Yeah.
we're all aching for
Yeah.
like another amazing 2D Worms game. And it's
Yeah.
been
Well,
it's
I'll
been
tell
like
you what,
8 years
we
since
just
Worms
had one.
WMB.
We've just had
Oh,
one with the
8
release of
years
Worms
already.
Armageddon Anniversary Edition on the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, and the Switch. Available now at
Yes.
All Good, the store on the console.
Yes, this is the store at all. At all console based stores.
I already saw. Listen, Team 17 have already paid me to
Okay.
as a consultant on the game. Like I've got the money I'm getting from it. I
Yeah.
think it's a good port. I think they did a really good job. I think the museum content on its own is great. They did it's the best console port of Worms Armageddon. And I think considering the previous competition was the PS1 and the Dreamcast versions, I think that, it's really solid. It's really good, And
Yeah.
I'm really happy that Armageddon, like one of the reasons why I push Armageddon as the version when we do live in-person tournaments here in LA, one of the reasons I push Armageddon is I think it's the most accessible version of Worms right now. It's the most affordable version of Worms. And if you go online to play with randos, there will be people there. They might be saying deeply offensive things, but they're there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you try to find, if you go online if you go to find a game in Worms WMD, you'll probably be waiting a while, And I think that's a shame because Worms WMD is not a bad game. It's not perfect, but it is inching closer to what I think Worms should be. The worst Worms game we've had in the last 30 years, in my humble opinion, has been Worms Rumble. Because I think that the promise of real-time Worms it's a solid premise, and they whiffed it so hard because they were chasing the Fortnite esports crowd. That's what this means. This is the universally accepted hand signal for esports.
Yeah. I did. So okay, you played Worms Rumble. Dave, did you play Worms Rumble? I did not play it,
and I won't.
I did. I did play it. I bought it because it was on sale for $1.50 on Steam. So I bought it.
Yeah.
And then it was on sale on the Switch for 99 cents. So I bought it. I've yet to play either of them because nobody's playing them, but I bought them.
I did, however, play and absolutely love Worms Crazy Golf. And this is
Worms Crazy Golf.
Yeah, this is a perfect moment to ask this question that was specified to be asked after the previous one. Which Worms game is the best, and why isn't it Worms Armageddon, Ben?
It's straight away. It's Worms the Director's Cut. It is Worms the Director's Cut.
Yes.
It is Worms the Director's Cut.
And in your unbiased opinion.
In my unbiased opinion, full of biases, especially because I'm now working on it, is Worms the Director's Cut. It is the game that is the most customizable. As we've already discussed, you can make not just your own color maps, not just your own speech banks, where you can extend how many things a worm can say. You don't just have to say, like I said, you don't just have to say bye-bye and oh dear when they die. You can have unlimited, potentially, well, I guess up to maybe 10 for each circumstance that you run into.
Would that pick it at random, or?
As far as I'm aware, it picks them at random.
That's cool.
I've experimented with speech banks where you create your own. You can add your own terrains without having to install a WormKit mod.
IGN.
Yeah. Worms the Director's Cut is, in my opinion, it is the best version of Worms, and the only thing it doesn't have going for it is the fact that you can't play it online and there's no PC version. And that's fine. It's a treat. This specifically was intended as a treat for Amiga players, people who played the game on the Amiga. I think it's been 30 years or 27 years since this one came out, or 28 years. I would love to see it finally hit the PC in some playable way. And it's the 30th anniversary. Now's the best time to do it.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. I'm going to have to get myself an Amiga so I can try this. Anyway, so seeing as if you want to talk about Worms the Director's Cut, you've been said to have a love affair with Worms the Director's Cut, in particular the niche Amiga only one. So can you tell us about this game and why it's so good?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, if you've ever read anything online about Worms the Director's Cut, I either wrote it or I'm cited as the primary source. What I don't know about Worms the Director's Cut could be written on the back of a very small postage stamp with a very large pen. Like I said, it has high speed. Like there's almost no waiting time between turns. It moves really, really quickly. It is the first game to introduce weapons like the Mad Cow, the Homing Pigeon, the Holy Hand Grenade, the Super Sheep, the Sheep Strike, the Concrete Donkey. It has 2 weapons that are exclusive to Worms the Director's Cut. One being the Grenade Launcher, which is kind of a prototype of the Mortar, and the other being the Sheep on a Rope, which wasn't exclusive until Worms WMD. But even the Worms WMD version doesn't behave like the Sheep on a Rope behaves in Worms the Director's Cut.
Now wait. Was the Sheep on a Rope, was that concept that came with Worms DC, like,
Worms
or
and
did it
Director's
come
Cut,
with?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that at all. Like, yeah, I saw it. Like, I've been using the sheep on rope in Worms WMD and the goat on a rope as well, which is extremely wonky, but I had no idea.
So yeah, the sheep on a rope. The way that it works in Worms: The Director's Cut is you fire the ninja rope, but instead of the worm being on the end, it's a sheep, and you can fuck. I'm forgetting the
Swing
word.
the sheep.
Swing. You can swing. You can In Worms: The Director's Cut, it's called Tarzaning. So you can kind of let go of the rope and then release it. But the sheep, once you let go of the rope, when the sheep hits the terrain, it explodes. And my understanding, and my memory from the Worms WMD version is the sheep doesn't explode; it bounces along like a regular sheep at that point.
Oh, so you can't bounce off terrain to actually rope properly, right? I get
Well,
you.
you can if you're attached to the rope. You can bounce off terrain. If you let go of the rope, and it hits the terrain, that's when it detonates.
Right, I get you.
When you in Worms WMD, at least, like when you release the sheep off the rope, that's when it explodes. Like when it hits the land, basically. It's pretty useful.
How it works in Director's Cut as well, yeah. Wait, no, there is a difference in the WMD one, because doesn't the I know what the difference is. So the WMD one, when you press it, it just releases the sheep like normal, and then when you press space again, it fires the rope, right?
Yeah.
Where the Worms Director's Cut version, you fire it as if you are the one using the ninja rope, and then there's a sheep on the end of the rope instead.
Oh, okay. That makes that makes it a little better, actually, because like sometimes in Worms WMD you'll release your sheep or something, and then it just doesn't have a place to attach to, and you're like, what the hell? It's just gonna like go into the water. Having more control over that is nice.
There is a GIF. I made a GIF of how the sheep on a rope works because I remember trying to explain it to people on the Team 17 forum, and no one could wrap their head around it. So I just recorded a GIF on it. It's on. If you go to worms2d.info and go to the weapons selection and select sheep on a rope, there's a GIF at the bottom showing how the sheep on a rope works.
Let's have a look. So on Worms 2D.
worms2d.info/sheep on a rope, with dashes between each word. The S on sheep and the R on rope are uppercase. And if you scroll down to the very bottom, there's a little GIF made by yours truly. Because again, if it's on the internet and if it's about Worms the Director's Cut, I'm probably responsible in one way or another.
Right.
Like, all of the
Can
Worms
you
Director's
check
Cut
the chat?
content...
Is that the right page? Because I'm getting a...
Let's have a look. Oh no, let me link it. I should have just done that in the first place. This is the one. There it is.
Oh, dashes. Okay. I've put underlines.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah,
looks
if you
like
scroll
down,
right. So let me
near the bottom. There's that little GIF, and it's on the alien. And again, another example of something we lost from the second generation onwards.
So we'll just go to the display screen for a moment, so you can see this. So this is it here.
Mm-hmm.
Looks really nice. I mean, it looks like it works exactly how I would want it to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. It's such a cool weapon. It's a really cool weapon.
I like it because
for like 20 years.
Right. It's one thing I've noticed just from Worms WMD is like you can use it in cases where like you're on one side of the map, you don't want to actually go over to the other side of the map and like expose your worms to danger. Yeah. You just want to like have something go over there and attack for you. It's also nice because if you're good at roping, it's like, hey, I get extra one more thing that I can do like well. But one thing I gotta ask, so Worms DC, so is there a one player mode? Like,
so it doesn't have a single player campaign. I mentioned that the Amiga version of the original Worms had a training mode, and that's in Director's Cut as well, where it will randomly generate a map and then drop one of your worms in the middle of the map, and then randomly spawn a target somewhere else on the map. And then once you destroy that target, it then generates another one and another one. And the goal is how many targets can you destroy before the time runs out. And as Liam has pointed out in the chat, Worms the Director's Cut, it wasn't just Andy's last hurrah. It was Team 17's last Amiga game ever. It was the last game that they released for the Amiga. It's only sold about 5,000 copies. And it was also Andy showing to Team 17 that Worms didn't have to just be what it had been. Like when they were working on Worms 2, and I've already mentioned this to you, but just for the benefit of everyone who's in the chat now who wasn't here an hour ago, originally Worms 2 was basically just going to be an HD update of the original Worms. They weren't going to add any new weapons, any new features. It was basically just going to be Worms United, but with those cartoony graphics. And then it was Andy working on the director's cut and adding things like roping and the Holy Hand Grenade and all those other weapons and other features that convinced Team 17 that, okay, let's add more stuff to Worms 2. So Worms, the director's cut, is the reason why you have Armageddon. It's the reason why we have WMD. It's the reason why the franchise didn't just like stick in this one little rut. It grew into, I say rut, not like that, that was kind of stuck in a cul-de-sac, but like director's cut proved to Team 17 that Worms had room to grow. And that's what gave us, the things that we love today, like the Super Sheep and the
Ninja rope.
Concrete Donkey and a bat and roping, and the Super Sheep and
I love roping.
A version of the Buffalo of Lies in Worms WMD that Andy Davison does not like.
Yeah, I have to admit, that Buffalo of Lies is it's a little bit wonky. I think I would like it more if it just looked a little more like Wormsy. Like to me, it doesn't have the same like aesthetic appeal as like the sheep. Maybe it just needs to be a little crazier looking or something.
Without giving too much away, I know that Andy's ideas for the Buffalo of Lies is that it was supposed to be the counterpart for the Concrete Donkey. So if you think about the Concrete Donkey is yes, it did come out after Alien Breed 3D. In fact, the last page of it did come out after Alien Breed 3D 2. Because I think the last page of the manual for Alien Breed 3D2 had an ad for Worms DC in it. But the idea of the Concrete Donkey is a lot of people just drop it on, where there's a worm. That's fine. Yeah. But the idea of the Concrete Donkey is if you've got people, dark siding deep in the terrain where you can't get to them with, a mole bomb or anything else. Maybe you can't get down into that nook to release a sheep. The Concrete Donkey will just smash down. It's a god tier weapon.
Right.
And the idea is, so the Concrete Donkey is perfect for getting dark side players. If a light side player then is someone who's on the surface, they're on the map. Obviously, you've got stuff like airstrikes that can deal with that. But if you want something more godlike, the Buffalo of Lies should have been something that attacks those light side players and deals a considerable amount of damage from the top.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So like it's what I'm thinking is like it just causes full scale destruction to like pretty much the entire like top of a map or something. Like
maybe there are definitely weapons like that. I mean, if you think about things like Armageddon, if you think about things like the carpet bombs, Sheep Strike, I have an idea of what Andy would do with the Buffalo of Lies, but I'm going to keep that under my hat for now, and maybe that's something we come back to. If I come back on the show next year, I can talk about that in a little bit more detail.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, I want to speculate or something like maybe the Buffalo just runs across the entire top surface of the map, like no matter how far it is, and just like plows through everything. But which I guess actually there was a similar weapon in Worms Reloaded, like the ferrets, which I don't know. Maybe that didn't go over that well. I don't think the ferrets were not that interesting.
I don't even remember the ferrets at
Nobody
all.
remembers the ferrets.
I only recently remembered that Armageddon had the mole bomb in it. Like I'd forgotten about the mole bomb until my nephew used it in a game. I played Armageddon with him yesterday morning, and he used the mole bomb. It's like I have forgotten this weapon is here.
Oh man.
Was it Clan Wars or Reloaded or maybe both that had the campaign that you played through?
Every Worms game from Worms 2 onwards has had a single player campaign of sorts.
Yeah.
Worms 2's campaign, Worms United actually, Worms United had a campaign as well. But the campaigns in United and Worms 2 were very, very, very simple.
Angular wooden giraffe.
Here's a map. destroy the enemy worms. Here are the weapons you have. To the point where in Worms United, they don't even plan the worm placement. It's still, if you play the same mission multiple times in Worms United, the worm placement is different every time. Worms 2 is only a step above that. The worm placement is not random. And then Worms Armageddon onwards, where we have scripted missions where you have, it's not just kill every enemy worm. You have things like protect this particular worm, or collect this crate, or survive X number of turns. And then it will do like a scripted, the Worms games, the single player campaign's always got a little bit more sophisticated from Armageddon onwards, to the point where there was a Primus strategy guide for Worms Armageddon that I own, but it's based on a pre-release version of Armageddon, so some of the missions are different. But that strategy guide has a whole 2-page spread about Worms the Director's Cut, which is really cool.
What the hell? That's really fascinating. Does this guide go through all the missions in Worms Armageddon?
Yeah, it's a full-on strategy guide. I have a copy somewhere. I found it recently, but it's been put back in storage.
Okay, that's really fascinating to me.
If I find it, I bought it on eBay, like I want to say 15 years ago. So I'm gonna have a look now and see if there are any on eBay. Worms Armageddon strategy guide.
That would actually be interesting. It pops up. Wow.
Yes, you're looking at between $35 and $50 for a Worms Armageddon strategy guide.
That's not too bad. So Worms Armageddon strategy guide. Let's have a look.
I am wondering, like, if they, wondering how advanced the strategies are, because it would be interesting if, like,
I know that the strategy guide came out concurrently with when they released Worms Armageddon on N64 and Game Boy Color, because it came out for those systems a little later than it came out for PS1 and Dreamcast. But it does have, like, all of these missions are present in every version of Worms Armageddon except the Game Boy Color version. So I think these guides are fairly universal-ish. But yeah, it's a full-on strategy guide. It goes through every single mission. It gives you complete history of Worms up to that point, including a lovely little spread about Worms the Director's Cut. Yeah, it's pretty
interesting, because I think, like, with the missions in Worms Armageddon, there's a few missions that people would, like, absolutely want to have that for, like the Eiffel Tower mission, Water Surprise, and I would be curious to just go through that and, like, see what some of these initial strategies were, because like the current, like, strats for the run are very, like, they're very optimized, but there's a few where it's like they might have actually had, like, one of the more optimal methods early on. Like there's a few, like, simple ones where it's not super hard to come up with a good strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really fascinating. And let's see, I have not been able. I'm sorry, I can't multitask. I can't download the Parsec app.
I will be completely honest with you. I did not hear anything you just said because I was looking at Worms listings on eBay.
Oh no worries. No, I was I was just saying that I'm interested in the strategy guide. Maybe, like, that'd be cool to do a video on or something. Like just go through it and be like, oh wow, they were smart back in the day. Or they were not smart. I don't know. Maybe.
I think the real trick is finding someone who's willing to spend $35 to $50 plus shipping and then slice up the book to scan every page. I'm not doing that to my copy. I will not stop anyone else from doing it to theirs.
There is that aspect, yeah.
Yeah.
I would consider doing that. I'm not a collector, I wouldn't care, but but I might not want to spend the money.
I might actually buy it.
Hey,
do it.
Yeah.
I remember when I bought my copy of the Game Boy Color version of Armageddon at that game in the Luton Arndale Center all the way back in '99. I remember the shelves being lined with. I remember seeing cardboard displays. I remember seeing the N64 version on display, the Game Boy Color version, the Game Boy, the PlayStation versions, and I remember, because this was a point where they would put the strategy guides near the new releases, so there was a whole shelf of the Worms Armageddon strategy guide, and at the time I remember thinking, haha, I don't need that. I've been playing Worms since 1996. But I still wish I'd bought it to have,
just to laugh at their inferior strategies.
Oh, here's the thing: is these are strategies being those strategy guides were always written by people with early releases of the game or unfinished versions of the game. Like I remember buying the strategy guide for Twilight Princess, and I bought
Oh,
it not because I don't buy strategy guides because I want to know how to play the game. I buy them because I'm
yeah.
fascinated in like, they sometimes include making of stuff or character art, and that was what I was interested in. And
Oh,
all of the locations, because they were using a Japanese copy of the game, so all of the locations were it was just their translation of the Japanese names, and
oh,
most of
just
them
like
did not match what was in the
wow.
final English translation. Yeah,
That's a pretty huge oversight. I actually didn't know that about strategy guides in general.
yeah,
But thinking about it, yeah, that's how they would have to be
yeah.
made. Whoa.
Because
Um,
strategy guides used to be. I don't know if they were big business, but I feel like they were everywhere in the late '90s, early 2000s.
no other choice sometimes. Like you
Yeah,
just had to, unless you had a friend who told you through the grapevine that like, you know, to get into Great Guys Casino and Super Mario RPG, you have to do 3 jumps somewhere. You would have to have a strategy guide. You would
yeah.
have to uh you'd have to like do that. Um I feel like back in the day, secrets and stuff though just had a way of filtering through. You would just like learn about them whether you
Yeah.
wanted to or not. like
Yeah,
I don't know.
you'd read something in like a Games Master magazine, or someone at school would be like, "Oh, have you heard this? You figured out how to do this fatality in Mortal Kombat?" Or, I mean, that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons like the original Legend of Zelda didn't come with a map, because Shigeru Miyamoto wanted kids on the playground to be like sharing. Oh, have you found this place? No, I haven't. Where'd you find it? And they wanted people to
Ah,
share, like have that communal experience. And it was the same with Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing was about having communal experiences and sharing stories with each other. So that's kind of why those games are the way that they are.
yeah. Actually, that's some of that still applies to like Worms Armageddon because
Yeah.
there's so much game knowledge that there aren't like secret places to go, but there's so much game knowledge that is like only certain people like myself can like tell you, and like
Yeah.
99% of people aren't ever going to ask about it, but it's like a lot of us have like this very specific knowledge about like how certain weapons work and stuff, and it's just
I'm gonna
like
link
it's
a page.
yeah.
I'm gonna
Oh,
link a page to Worms 2D in the
yeah.
chat.
Uh
And
huh.
this page is the tricks and glitches page for the first generation. And every
Yeah.
single article, almost every single article linked under Amiga version, was me
Nice.
experimenting and researching, um, and just trying stuff out. And it's like, oh, this is cool. And the beauty of Worms 2D is that I got to document that stuff so that the 4 other people who play Worms the Director's Cut regularly,
Yeah.
can know that if you place more than 20 landmines on the screen at once, it will crash the game.
Dude, that is, to me, that's crucial knowledge. I find that very important.
Yeah,
Nice. So it sounds like you tested a lot. So like you
and I'm still
tested.
testing. There's a bug on here that I added last week.
Oh my
Typo.
god.
Yeah,
Wow.
like it's pretty robust. Like some of this stuff, like being able to like bazooka through the wall and the Indian rope trick, those are things that are also on the PC version. Um,
Yeah.
but then a lot of the stuff is like, uh, this is stuff that is unique to these versions of the game. Some of these bugs are things that other people found and tried to fix with like fan-made patches.
Okay.
Um, and then a lot of this stuff, like I said, is just stuff that I've documented. Like if you are in Worms the Director's Cut, even in the latest version, there was a patch disc, 2 patch discs released in 1997. The Ninja Rope is incredibly buggy. On the retail
Okay.
release, the Ninja Rope can and will get you stuck in the terrain or fling you off the side of the map entirely. When they
Okay.
patched it, it's a lot more stable, but it doesn't interact with weapons crates very nicely. So if you collect a weapon crate from a rope, there's always a possibility that your rope will get stuck on the corner of where the crate
Oh.
was. So that becomes a new like spin point. So
Okay. Okay.
but also I've collected weapon crates in Worms Director's Cut while on the rope, and it's done things like trap me in the terrain, throw me off the screen, or in a couple of instances, crash the game entirely. Now that's only happened in
Oh
emulation,
no.
but it's
Oh my
there
god.
are a lot of interesting bugs and tricks and glitches in Worms the Director's Cut, and every single one of these is something that I have discovered and documented.
Dude, nice. Honestly, with rope, that is so expected. Even in Worms WMD, there are rope bugs.
Yeah.
Like there's a bug where your rope will just get cut, which I don't know what causes it, but there is also a bug related to crates. When you get a crate, your rope it'll be sort of like you ran into something and it will just automatically release your rope.
Oh, interesting.
No bugs where you get stuck in the terrain, but I think
Well, I mean, the way that
yeah.
Worms the Director's Cut handles terrain is very different from literally. I mean, the Amiga versions of Worms specifically handle terrain very differently, because the Worms movement actually cuts into the terrain. If you go back to that
It
sheep
does.
on a rope glitch, sheep on a rope GIF that I shared with you earlier, when you see the worms sliding down the hill, you can see it kind of scraping the terrain as it goes.
Okay.
And so
That is a little different.
the way that the game checks, worm like velocity and whether it's hitting, terrain or not, it is possible if a worm is traveling at sufficiently high speeds to pass through solid rock and end up stuck in the terrain. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. The way that I tested it, I thought I found a glitch where if you dropped 20 landmines in a hole and then jumped into the hole, it would vaporize the worm. That is not what happened. What it did was all of those 20 landmine explosions going off at once caused the worm to fly away at such velocity that it cut through the terrain to the point.
My god.
And you look, I didn't realize that that's what it's doing until I scrolled over and I saw a worm sprite shaped hole where it had passed through the terrain, and then on the next check it was gone.
Like Looney Tunes,
yeah,
Wile E. Coyote,
like a Looney Tunes hole, yeah.
Okay, that's crazy. Wow, that's really fascinating. I'm trying to think. Have I seen anything in in Worms Revolution? You can do that with objects. If you if you like there's a water bottle object that can move. Like if you bump into it with rope, you can sometimes give it enough velocity that it will just rocket off the screen like instantly, so you don't even see it. It just poofs away.
Oh wow.
So like this is a case of that.
I never spent enough time with those Worms games, which is a shame because I love the physics objects aspect. I love the water pooling aspect.
I love the water. The water is really cool.
I just think it's a shame that the game feels so slow.
Slowness is our slowness is our number one enemy in Worms games. Let's see. I wanted to say I can't multitask. I didn't download the Parsec app. I just can't do that unless it's ahead of time. We still have a handful of questions left.
Yeah.
I just got back. I had to go AFK for a minute there. I got a phone call. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. So,
we could. I called you. Wondering where you disappeared to.
Yeah, it was just 2 minutes. I think it was more of you're involved with the director's cut, but you've went through that. So the next one after that.
I've talked about why I think Worms the Director's Cut is the best version of the game. I don't think I've gone into a lot of detail about what is happening with the update and what my involvement is.
Yeah. Well, that's basically what the next one was.
That. Sure.
Please.
So Andy Davidson, the original creator of Worms, back in 2018 posted a couple of interesting photos to his Instagram. One was the Worms the Director's Cut loading screen, but instead of saying loading, it said version 1.5 alpha, which was interesting because the last version of the game was 1.05. And then the other was an option screen showing things like Worm Select and Sudden Death Water Rising, which are not features that exist in Worms the Director's Cut. So the speculation was he was working on an update at that time. And the reason why that update ended up not happening at that time is because Andy's he was still using a legit Amiga 1200. He's still coding on an Amiga 1200. And the problem with Amiga 1200s is they have these capacitors that over time can start to leak, and they can damage the circuit board on the they can damage the circuit board on the Amiga. So he recently, I want to say like a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, got his Amiga recapped. So all of the capacitors were replaced. He got it upgraded so that there's like an SD card slot on the thing now. He moved out the kind of physical HDD and now has a flash drive, hard drive on there. He backed up his original Amiga hard drive, which was amazingly still working, onto this flash drive. And decided he's going to start working on that update of Worms the Director's Cut. And the plan is to release it in January of 2025 as a free update, which, given that Worms the Director's Cut is available to download for free from Dream 17, that means as long as you have an Amiga emulator and legal copies of the Amiga Kickstart ROMs, you can be playing this update in January. But he's adding a bunch of new features. He wants to collect a bunch of new maps for the game, so that's something I've been helping with. And
that's fascinating. What kind of maps are like?
So
is it?
So a lot of the maps are, Andy wants Worms the Director's Cut to be a celebration of the Amiga and a celebration of things that he likes. So one of the maps that I made, and it might not make it into the game because we're right now, just to give you a little peek behind the curtain, I made a map of the Sega logo because Andy is also a huge Sega fan. And we are currently awaiting, because Team 17 are working with us on this, we are currently awaiting permission from Sega to use the map or not. I will, I'm actually going to, in the chat, so it will make it a little bit easier for you to kind of share on the stream. Let me just pull up these videos. There's a couple of screenshots and there's a video. Where are my screenshots? But basically, so again, I mentioned earlier in the stream that Worms the Director's Cut lets you have dual layer maps. So you can have maps with kind of a background that you can walk in front of. So the way that I did that for the Sega logo, and you can kind of see it here on the screenshots that I've just sent to you both, is I have the inside of the Sega logo is not solid. So it's just the white part is the solid terrain, and the blue inside is the backdrop. So you can climb into and walk around the Sega logo. Nice. I've gone one further, and I've added, and you can also see in one of these screenshots, I added a couple of mountain sets. So like there are various Sega consoles. So right now we're just waiting on Sega to sign off on whether or not we can include this or not. But that's just one of the examples of the maps that I've made for Worms of Director's Cut. And I'll say this: I've always found logo maps very, very boring. I don't think logo maps are fun to play on. Playing on the Sega logo and going inside of it and into the blue space, it
looks fun.
Surprisingly good fun. It's a surprisingly fun map to play on.
That seems. Can I ask one thing? Is it possible to connect the letters so that it becomes a rope race? Is that conceivable?
That would be good.
Maybe I will do that as a separate map. I could do that for Armageddon as a separate.
That might ruin
the background. Well, the thing is, I don't know if rope racing would work on Worms the Director's Cut because the physics of the rope are very different. But you can also do more things with the rope, because with the rope on Worms the Director's Cut, you're not limited to how far you can aim it. So you can aim straight down. And one of the things that I frequently do is I will just do a vertical jump, launch the rope, and then I'll be roping across the surface of the terrain instead of a cavern above.
Yeah, that's one thing that like there is a weird option for that now in like Armageddon, but I don't know. No one really uses it, but I've always wanted to like see what roping would be like if you could just fire the repeat shots at like different angles and stuff, because it's we have some like weird we have some like tool assisted runs of people like doing that, showing off what that would look like at a high level, but to actually like learn that at a high level would be like relearning roping, which would be really fun and interesting.
I would one thing I would like in rope in Worms Armageddon is the ability, you know how when you're roping at a certain angle it'll shoot one way, the ability to maybe hold a button down so that you can shoot it the other direction. That would be very useful. But
That could be a lot
Okay.
of fun. I'm
That
gonna
that
put
would man, that would
I'm gonna
change
put a
everything. I guess
video
like, huh.
in the chat. So I'm gonna post this link to this video in the chat. So one of Andy's ventures that he did after he left Team 17 is he opened up a bar called the iBar, which at the time was pretty ahead of its time. You had like these little screens throughout the bar where you could request music, and now that's everywhere. Like my local pub does that.
Oh,
But at
so
the
like it's an
time,
internet cafe sort of
well, it's
ish
like a
idea.
bar, but you could while you were there, you had all these little terminals to like choose what music was going to be playing, and it was fairly at the time fairly forward thinking. But now
Mhm.
everyone's doing that, and so
Okay.
iBar kind of is not it doesn't exist anymore. But for the iBar, that had this really cool logo. So Andy had me make a map of the iBar. I might actually be able to find the map to put in the chat for you to see. So the iBar logo had this kind of these kind of 3D blocks as the map, with a spray of spray paint behind them. Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna put a couple of different images in the chat for you to share. So one is there's one that's what the map looks like on its own, and then there's one layer for how the actual solid layer of the map, and another image for the background layer of the map. And then the link I've linked to is them playing down is them playing on the map. But
Oh,
if you
looks
look at
cool.
these images, you can kind of see like what the actual, like, you can see what the map looks like on its own, but then you can also see the individual layers. So dual layer maps are made up of two images, one that is the front layer, which is the solid terrain, and one that
Mhm.
is the background. So as you're looking at these images of the map, you see how they kind of layer on top of each other. So
Yeah,
you've
it looks
got
dope.
the white part is the solid terrain, and as you blow it away, it reveals that kind of, kind of dark blue gray kind of wireframe behind it. But the
Oh,
blue spray paint is in the background all the time. It is just a background layer.
that's super cool. I've always
Yeah.
loved playing on like maps that sort of have that 3D look to them. Like
Mm.
it just seems like kind of interesting. Uh, One thing that comes to mind with this ability for Worms DC to have layers, you could have like I don't know, you could have like say a worm or a sheep or something. And that's the whole map, and you blow it
Yeah.
up and it has a spooky, scary skeleton inside.
Yeah,
Ah,
you could
yeah.
Something like that.
absolutely do that. One of the other people who's making maps, and again, it depends on whether I don't think we'll be able to get clearance for this one, but he did a map of, and Como, you might be more familiar with this, but Rick Mail and Aid Edmondson from Bottom.
Oh yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the background layer, instead of mountains, it is just the background of like the flat that they lived in. But as you blow away the terrain, it reveals like just the dark silhouette versions of them from the end credits.
I loved the
Ooh,
Dangerous
yeah.
Brothers. That was my favourite that they done, the Dangerous Brothers. But yeah, Bottom's great.
Bottom was a lot of fun. I remember watching, it was Friday nights on BBC Two. Cracking show.
So moving on, if you want to do the next one, my black.
Yeah, we've talked about like you're kind of friends with like Andy Davidson, which as I
Mhm.
guess maybe we haven't mentioned, like maybe someone's just tuning in. He's like the creator of Worms.
Yeah.
Do you happen to have any like spicy or mild stories about the guy? And also, have you played him in Worms and are you better than him?
We have not played Worms yet. I think
Okay.
mostly because he and I both are of the opinion that Worms the Director's Cut is the best one. Um,
Okay.
he's biased because he programmed Worms the Director's Cut.
It's kind
I'm
of his
biased.
baby.
Yeah, it's very much his. That's one of the reasons why he's doing this update. Is he very much like Worms the Director's Cut, I think, is of his contributions to Worms, other than creating it. I think Worms the Director's Cut is the thing he is most proud of. We've not yet played. I've floated the idea to him of playing at some point over Parsec. One of the even though we're both originally from the UK, he lives in the UK, I live here in LA, so there's a time difference. I think if I ever get to go back to visit, I might maybe try to plan a trip to, at the very least, go out for a drink with him at some point. He's just a really, he's a really down to earth guy. He has a real kind of punk rock mentality to like what he wanted Worms to be and what he continues to want Worms to be. he he has very firm ideas in his head about what the game is, and I think that his ideas are largely incredibly sound. There's a wonderful kind of clarity of vision with what Andy wants Worms to be. And I would imagine he would mop the floor with me if we ever actually finally got to play. Maybe
curious.
we'll eventually get to play over Parsec if I can ever convince him to, the sacrilege of playing Worms the Director's Cut on a machine that is not actually an Amiga. If I can convince him to play over Parsec or something.
Oh man,
he did. You are right, KRD. He did come back and worked on. He was a consultant on Revolution, but he left. He did leave after that. I think the physics objects thing was an idea that he was very interested in.
Yeah.
He came back for Revolution. Here's a fun thing. I bought Worms Revolution on the PC and on the 360. Did you know that the 360 version was published by WB Games?
I don't
Warner
think
Brothers
I knew
published
that.
one. Yeah,
Pass.
it's weird, right?
That is weird.
Yeah.
Why would that be a thing? That's
No
weird.
idea. Team 17 self-published on the PS3 and the PC. I think, if I had to guess, because most of their previous games, Team 17 games, were published on the 360, mostly by Microsoft. Like, Microsoft is the one who asked them to make Worms for the 360 back in 2006. So I wonder if, I know at the time you had to have like an established publishing deal with Microsoft. And I wonder if, because Team 17 were not themselves established as a publisher yet, that Microsoft said no, so they had to partner with, with another company like Warner Brothers to make that happen.
That is wild.
I'll have to ask Ash about that someday. I bet he knows.
Yeah, but as you said, Andy is. It seems like he's really responsible for a lot of the most creative decisions involved in like the Worm series.
Particularly the early stuff, yeah, like up to Armageddon.
Yeah, he left it around World Party, I believe, and then he came back.
He left during the development of Armageddon.
During, okay.
Yeah, he left during the development of Armageddon. I know that he has a huge appreciation for people who play Worms games. I think it makes sense that Armageddon is the most popular game because, again, it is the most accessible. It is the one that got a wide console release at the time. It's out now again on modern consoles. But I know that there's a special ownership that he feels particularly of Director's Cut, which makes sense because the Amiga versions of Worms, he developed those. Those were entirely his babies.
Like all him.
Yeah.
Someone. Yeah. And he started making the original Worms like wasn't he programming it on his calculator?
So it started off as a kind of a graphing calculator thing, and then he learned to program and he started developing this kind of artillery game on the Amiga. And he originally started off with like these little soldier sprites, and then he ripped sprites from another very popular game from the early 90s and used that instead. And then he decided, what if they were worms? And made the sprites worms. And the original early build of the game was Total Wormage. And that's what he took to CES, to Team 17 in 93, 94. And they played it for 5 minutes and they offered him a publishing deal on the spot.
That's what I would do. If I played Worms for 5 minutes for the first time ever, that's what I would do. I would offer the guy massive amounts of money and a publishing deal.
Do you have massive amounts of money?
I don't.
Some money?
I would just lie about it and just say
just
that I did.
Venmo me whenever you're ready. It's fine. I'm good. But I know that like that does not happen anymore. That doesn't happen. You can't show up at a trade show with 2 floppy disks and approach a developer and say, "I've made a game. Would you like to publish it?"
If you did, they would be like, "Hey, great game. You should probably like publish that yourself."
You can just do it yourself on Steam now. Like if Andy Davidson had been born, 10 years later, the story of Worms would be very, very different. I mean, also, again, something that Andy has said very frequently, like, and this was a slogan for the Amiga at the time: only the Amiga makes it possible. Like, I don't know that coding would have been as accessible to him on other systems as it was for the Amiga. He learned to program on that thing. He learned to program in a whole new programming language to submit worms to a game contest in an Amiga magazine specifically for games programmed on this in this particular coding language, which was called Blitz Basic 2.
Blitz Basic, okay.
And the magazine finished up the competition, and they never even mentioned worms at all. And it turns out the reason why it never got mentioned was because Andy broke one of the rules, and the rules was when you submit the game, you have to provide the full source code as well. And he didn't provide the source code, but he didn't know
about that.
The source code,
oh my god, that's got to be brutal. You learn a whole new language, whole new programming language, and submit it. It just doesn't even get mentioned.
But then that's the thing that lit a fire up his ass to take it to Team 17. And like, if I don't know that we would be talking about worms today if Amiga Format had said, yeah, let's do it. Let's put it on our magazine cover disc. I think that version of the universe is we're not having this conversation. We're playing something else entirely.
I don't think I would quite like that alternate reality. I'm quite happy with this one.
No, I think the only alternate reality I want is the one where Worms: The Director's Cut sold like gangbusters and somehow had an online mode.
That would be good.
Played online by people today instead of Armageddon. I think that's the only difference I would want. But yeah, as Liam has said, like if he were 10 years older, it probably would have been an iPhone app. It would have been an iPhone app rather than an Amiga game, and maybe it would have had that kind of success. It would have been bought by EA, and then they wouldn't have put a new one out for the last 10 years.
Right.
He did. I do think, Liam, I do think, because he coded it in a different language before. I don't know which language he coded it in, but I know that Andy really likes Blitz Basic 2, and he still uses Blitz Basic 2, in part because I know that there are other one of the other big ones for the Amiga back in the day was called Amos, and I know that Amos is really, what's the word I'm looking for? Really unoptimized. Like it includes a lot of additional stuff that the game you have coded does not need. Whereas Blitz Basic 2 is very streamlined, very elegant, very optimized. And that is, if Andy is awake right now, he's probably coding. If I'm being completely honest with you, he's probably either at his desk coding or he's seeing a movie. I think those are or he's asleep. Like those are the things that are happening right now. If I had to guess,
can I just say, like, I want him to create a new Worms if he feels like it. He should just. He's probably not allowed to, like, directly right now, right? But he should just do that.
He and I talk about stuff. I've thrown ideas at him for the patch. Like one of the things that they added, that Dead Code and Cyber Shadow added, where you can hold down Shift so that your worm doesn't change direction when you move. I told Andy about that, and he's like, "Yeah, that's easy to put in. Let's put that in." I told him about the backflip in Worms Armageddon. And I had to send him a video that I recorded in the Switch version of the game showing all the different jumps you can do, the regular half jump, the back jump, the vertical jump, the backflip, and then the half backflip. Because you can do all of those in Director's Cut except for the backflip and the half backflip. And so I would like the backflip to make its way into Director's Cut. That would make it the perfect version of the game. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that Andy wants to do. It's always possible, but I'm very excited about it. I'm very proud to be working on it. There's stuff about the game that I know now that Andy's forgotten.
Explaining backflips to Andy Davidson.
Explaining backflips to Andy Davidson. There's things like when it comes to color maps on the Amiga, color maps in Worms Armageddon, as you probably are aware, there's palette restrictions. Yeah. Those restrictions are so extreme on the Amiga version of Worms because a color map, even though it's it's AGA version of the game, 256 colors, but each plane in an Amiga game can only have 16 colors. So what we're looking at here with my backdrop right now, those mountains, that's one 16 color palette. There's another set of mountains behind it that you can't see that is also a separate set of 16 colors. The water, all of this water here is 16 colors. But
that is impressive.
The terrain, the worms, weapon crates, landmines all use the same. It's its own 16 color palette, but they all use the same 16 color palette. So when you make your own map for Worms, color 0 is transparency, Color
Uh-huh.
1 has to be white or near white. Color 2 has to be pink. Color 3 can be whatever you want. Color 4 has to be a brighter version of color 3 because those are used for crates. Color 5 can be whatever you want. Color 6 has to be a lighter version of color 5 because that's what's used for mines. And then everything else you can do whatever you want. But that's
That
16
that's 10 colors or something.
That's 16 colors of which you really only have control over
Wow.
what 11 of them are.
Damn.
So you end up with, I wonder if I have any of my originals, because one of the projects I did 100,000 years ago was I took all of the content from Worms Armageddon and Worms World Party and I converted it for use in Worms the Director's Cut. So we're talking about the terrain styles, every single map, all of the speech banks, the works. And I wonder if any of my original maps are present so that I can maybe show you something. Maps. Oh yeah, here's a ton of maps. Let's see. Oh hell yeah. So I took the let me just open it up in Photoshop to make sure it's playable, or that I can read the file because they're all IFF image files. I'm right now I'm opening the Worms World Party version of the Spectrum Tapes map.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Which I think that Spectrum Tapes map it's the last mission in Worms Armageddon. That for me is like that's an iconic Worms Armageddon map.
I think so.
And scaling that down to 16 colors was a real. I'm going to see if I can copy and paste this into. 1 second. Let me put this in the chat. There we go. Yeah. So that's 16 colors, if you can believe it. And
That actually looks amazing for 16 colors.
Very heavy dithering there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
And then let's
No, I mean that looks perfectly good. Yeah, there has to be. I guess there has to be dithering. There's no other way. But I mean, it looks good. I like it.
then,
Also, the dithering effect sometimes is fun to see. Sometimes it actually looks.
Yeah, dithering can
cool.
do some really, really cool stuff. It's a great way to kind of cheat additional colors. And if you're looking at if it's 16 colors, if it's on like a TV, you can kind of get away with it. Because sometimes those colors
Most of these
blend together in. Yeah.
These generally look quite good. And yeah, the dithering, like I barely even notice it on this ship. You can see it in the shadows, but I mean,
like, I know getting them up on the stream is a pain, and they're also graphics you've already
No,
seen.
that's fine. Quick and easy, actually.
But like taking like when you think about Worms Armageddon maps and terrains and stuff, like trying to crunch them down to 16 colors, and also downscaling them as well because the map size is approximately half. Like downscaling them as well.
That part, yeah. That is a lot of work though, and you have to like sort of like I assume it's not as simple as pressing a button. You sometimes have to go like into like specific like areas.
Oh yeah, like it's definitely it takes a lot of work for a lot of some of these take a lot of work to just kind of scrunch them down, and sometimes it's really easy, like the hospital terrain in Worms in Worms Armageddon. Some of the objects look good, some of them don't look as good. I mean, you can see. I'm gonna actually share this one with you, but you can see here where I've really had to kind of work hard to make the colors work to the point where I'm using pink a lot because I need to make sure that the pink is there for the worm sprites. And it's very hit and miss. Like some of this stuff works really well. Some of it doesn't quite work as well.
I would say it's like not even super noticeable. I mean, if I look at that, I can tell like, yeah, there's fewer colors, but it's not really that noticeable. It looks nice. Good to me.
The one of the things that I'm very proud of is that the terrain styles that did not get used in Armageddon, like the domestic and dinos, I was able to make those
Ooh,
able to put them in Worms the Director's Cut, so that's something else
nice.
Director's Cut doesn't have. And I'm pretty proud of how this works. I think this looks pretty good.
Yeah. From what I'm seeing, this looks quite good. Yeah. Um that's really awesome. And
This is the last one. I think I'm going to give you
okay.
one last one because I feel like I'm just sending you pictures now. It's starting to get a little bit.
That sounds good.
But yeah, like that was a lot of fun. It was a big challenge to kind of go through all of the graphics in Armageddon and try to downscale them in a way that still looks recognizable and still looks good. Some of them work better than others. I think this one, this is the construction one. I think this one works pretty well. But yeah, it was a fun challenge.
Nice.
And I'm the only. Here's the thing: no one asked me to do it. It's just
You're
something I
They look
literally
nice.
just doing
for
this.
myself.
That is a lot of work. So
So how much
I mean,
does an Amiga sell for these
Nice.
days? Because I think I need to get one.
Oh god, I mean, I bought mine like 15 years ago for I think it was like 100, but I also imported it from the UK, so it was shipping. If you're buying an Amiga 1200 right now, they start at £99 for just the computer itself.
Damn.
And they go up to like the Amiga 1200 Comic Relief Pack, which is bundled with a couple of games, is £314 boxed. One for 370. Yeah, you're looking at anywhere between like 100 and 500 pounds, depending on what state you want the Amiga to be in.
There's one for £205. If you look at the stream, what do you think of this one? Does that look good? Does that look right?
That's a pretty good setup.
That's a bid. Sorry. What? Yeah.
No, I'm looking at the actual Amiga, and it looks like there was like a SCSI drive there as well. I wasn't sure what that. Maybe a CD-ROM drive. That's not a bad little setup. Well, here's the thing, Mental, is that the Amiga 500 would be cheaper, but the Amiga 500 can't run Worms the Director's Cut. It does require an AGA chip. Yeah, that was only in the 1200, the 4000, and the CD32. You can also emulate it. Like,
Yeah.
I would be happy to like walk you through how to get set up with an emulator, and so you can play Worms
Yes,
the Director's
please.
Cut on your PC. Yeah,
That would be appreciated.
We'll have that conversation off mic, but for anyone else who's interested, the easiest way to emulate the Amiga, there's a fully licensed Amiga emulation package called Amiga Forever that is probably the easiest way to kind of basically have everything you need to run Amiga games out of the box. And it's like $40, and it's downloadable, and that has everything you need set up, and that runs that runs Worms the Director's Cut very nicely. It's very, very simple.
yeah. I'm definitely gonna have to play this when the update comes out.
Oh, you've definitely piqued my interest.
Yeah,
Let me
I'll have to
save
do a
that
stream.
website.
I'll have to stream this if possible. Ideally, I want something to speedrun within the game, but absent that, I'll just play it.
Yeah, because you could stream that if you done that on the emulator.
I think that I think the only thing that's really the closest thing to a speed run would be if you were to do the training mode, and if you were to use a seeded map so that everyone who does it is doing the same map. So it's like who can get the most targets in the 2 minutes on the default settings. That's probably the closest to speed running the Amiga. Amiga
it's also even if it's just random, like random stuff is fun in its own way. You just have to keep grinding for the luckiest possible map.
My Black will find a way to speedrun it. So
absolutely.
Moving on, can you tell us about Port Center on YouTube and Twitch?
Yeah,
you can
absolutely.
plug it.
So Port Center, Port Center is a YouTube series that I used to do. I started doing it in 2011, and the last episode I dropped was in 2019. So it's been about 5 years since I last did it. But it is a show about interesting and unique ports, conversions, re-releases of video games. As I mentioned earlier in the stream, I've always been fascinated by ports. So That's always been something that I've been fascinated by, particularly games from like the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. When a port comes out now, it's basically the same on every system, give or take, because they're developing it with a view to releasing it on other systems. But historically, that's not always what a port was. Sometimes a port is a game has been developed on one system, like Worms. Worms was developed on the Amiga. And the port isn't just, oh, you just take that code and optimize it for the system. You have to rebuild the entire thing from scratch, which is what happened with Worms. Every version of Worms that isn't the Amiga version, they've had to play the Amiga version to death and recreate it from scratch in a new programming language. So that's something I've always been fascinated by. So I did a pilot in 2011 where I talked about the PS1 version of Doom. Which is my personal favorite version of Doom. It is dark. It is moody. It is if the original Doom on the PC is like a high octane run and gun shooter, I think that the PS1 version, and to a certain extent the Sega Saturn version as well, because they share resources, is a little bit closer. It's a little bit more survival horror. It's still Doom. It is still recognizably Doom, and you can play it exactly the same way. But the lighting is different. The sound effects are different. The music is different. It is a different experience, and that, I think, psychologically changes the approach to the way that you play it.
Yeah.
I've looked at other things like the N64 version of StarCraft. I did a whole episode about the history of Worms. I did an episode about I mentioned this earlier before, the unreleased Game Boy Color version of Resident Evil. I'm just fascinated by ports. So the last episode I did was about how Disney's Aladdin, Earthworm Jim, The Lion King, and a bunch of other platformers from the 90s like Cool Spot all shared the same game engine because they were all built using the same code.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
They were all.
I love SNES graphics as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. The Super Nintendo was Bonza. That was the console I had other than the Amiga CD32 was the Super Nintendo and a Game Boy. But yeah, all of those games have like a shared lineage. Like they share code. They share like this. They use the same tools to like build the levels and everything like that. So, yeah, I that was the last episode that I did, was kind of about the influence that Aladdin had on video games, including the Sega Genesis Disney's Aladdin game is the reason Donkey Kong Country exists. Because Nintendo wanted a game for the Super Nintendo that looked as good as Disney's Aladdin looked on the Genesis.
Could you share your channel in the chat?
Yeah.
I want to give that a follow myself. I like watching documentaries and stuff like that. Anything to do with gaming and history, I like it. So that will give me some new content to watch.
Yeah, let me pull up the channel for you.
Excellent. Appreciated.
Yep, this is it.
You have some great videos. You have one on Lemmings, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I did a video about, gosh, I mean, a lot of my videos from the last few years have been trailers and clips and stuff like that. Oh, this isn't even the right channel, because so some of the videos are on one channel and some of them are on another, but there is a big playlist. Let me actually link you to the playlist.
Even better. Brilliant. So I can be nice and lazy and just sit back and watch it.
Yeah.
Order my pizza, just sit down and watch the playlist.
Yeah, because I did the show independently for a while, and then my friend Mikey, who has a YouTube channel called Film Joy, he does a show called there's the video. There it is. There's the full playlist. That's all of the episodes. He does a show called Movies with Mikey, and he was trying to grow his channel, and he asked me to bring Port Center to the channel, so I did. So I did a video 6 years ago called Sony's Lemmings Problem, and it kind of breaks down how, I personally feel that Lemmings is one of the greatest games ever made, and ever since Sony bought Psygnosis, Lemmings has kind of languished. Like the last big Lemmings game that we had was the PSP version, which then got ported to the PS2. There was a PS3 version, which is kind of actually Team 17 did those versions. But since then, we haven't had really a new or good Lemmings game. There was a Lemmings game for the Vita, but who owned a Vita, So I said that, it's a puzzle game. It is something that, maybe you want to do a couple of levels of. It is the perfect kind of game to make a mobile version of. And why haven't they done that? And then a company reached out to me to say, hey, we've just released a mobile Lemmings game. You should download it. And I did, and it's bad. So I don't know. Like I love Lemmings. I feel like Lemmings should still be going. You know, we should have Lemmings games for, you know, for every platform. I think the fact that it is a Sony exclusive is the thing that hurts it, because I don't think Lemmings
Seems weird.
could thrive on the PlayStation. It needs to be on. I think the
don't-
systems it needs to be PC and Switch. That's where it needs to be.
I understand it, but I just don't like exclusives in general. I just think
Yeah.
like, well, they're in this day and age. I can understand back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, why exclusives were kind of useful, Sega
Yeah.
versus Nintendo and all that. But in this day and age, I think it's better to reach out to as many platforms as possible if you've got a good product, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that Microsoft has kind of cottoned onto a little bit, and that's why we're getting, like, they put out Sea of Thieves on the PlayStation, on the PS5, which I think was really cool. But yeah, like, I don't think Sony has necessarily clicked onto that. I mean, there's that baseball game that they made, which has gone multi-platform the last couple of years because the licensors said, if you don't go multi-platform, we'll give it to someone who will. So PlayStation Studios have had to make it multi-platform. But I would love to see a new Lemmings game that also comes out on the PC, that also comes out on the Switch. And then, to Sony's credit, they are putting out PC games now. You can play, you know, Spider-Man and The Last of Us and God of War. Those games are available on the PC now, so it's not impossible. They might do it. They just have to. Someone has to come in and make a new Lemmings game.
It sort of falls into the same category. Like, I'm not really a Lemmings player or anything, but it does sort of fall into the same category of Worms. Like, it's a certain style of game that it had a peak popularity moment, and for some, I think it holds up, and like both Worms and Lemmings are great, but for whatever reason, like maybe it's the difficulty level or something, like a lot of new players are gravitate towards other kinds of games. I can't really explain it. It might be the puzzly aspect of it, or
But I feel like there's a whole untapped audience. Like, I mean, we make fun of gamers make fun of Angry Birds, but Angry Birds
I love Angry Birds.
Generational success. Angry Birds is a cracking game, but it's the kind of things like, oh, you're not a real gamer if you play Angry Birds. Well, then get stuff. That's fine. Maybe then I'm not a real gamer. Then fine. I'm having a good.
I'm an imaginary gamer.
Yeah. I feel like I'm a hypothetical game. I live purely on the abstract of the consciousness. I feel like, you know, when it comes to Lemmings, if Lemmings had been released in the 2000s, it would probably be the kind of thing that gamers go, oh, you're not a real gamer if you play The Sims or Animal Crossing or Lemmings. Yeah. Then good. Then I'm not a real gamer. That's fine. I'm having fun. I'll be over here having fun. You be over there playing the same re-releases of Madden and Call of Duty every 12 months. That's fine.
Right. I mean, when I hear somebody plays Lemmings or Worms, like in my mind, I'm like, oh, this is a refined game. This person has taste.
That is a refined taste.
I don't know if other people like who haven't played those games experience that. Maybe they're just like, what is this? What is this boomer playing? What is this like? Yeah. What is this guy?
Refined taste.
Like, to me, that's an example of like someone having actual taste, or maybe there's some like PC gamer supremacy going on in my head or something. But that's when I hear people playing like, I don't know, like just only AAA titles. I'm like, this person is whatever.
Yeah.
When I say to a person I've met and I say, oh, I play Worms Armageddon, I love Worms Armageddon, I've played it since 1999, and they say, oh, I love Worms, and then something switches and say like, oh, you don't understand, like, I love Worms. But it's great that everybody likes Worms. It's brilliant.
I think anyone who's spent any time, when I first started talking about, I've occasionally done local, like, in-person Worms tournaments at a little game shop here in Los Angeles called Game Realms in Burbank. A fantastic store. I think my favorite retro gaming store. When it comes to retro gaming stuff, they're great. And I've done tournaments with them. They do tournaments for like Tekken and Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. But I've done some in-person Worms tournaments with them. And when I first went to one of their tournament meetups, and I mentioned to a few people, oh, what game do you play? Oh, actually, I'm not here for the tournament. I'm here to kind of scope the place out because we might be doing a Worms tournament in the future. And when people were like, their ears would prick up, and then people who heard me mention worms would turn around and say, "Excuse me, did you just say worms?" And like,
Yeah.
there are so many people for whom like everyone's first Worms game is different. Like, I would be speaking to someone about Armageddon, and then someone would, "Oh, I used to play Worms Revolution back in the day," or "Oh, I played Worms WMD for a bit a few years ago," or "Yeah, I used to play the original on the PlayStation with my dad," and like. There are so
Yeah.
many different versions of Worms, and everyone has a different starting point, but everyone has more or less the same experience. It's easy to pick up, it's difficult to master, but they have a really fun time doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
agree. It's everybody has Worms radar. Like usually, if you mention Worms in a conversation, someone will know what you're talking about. And someone will be like interested.
Yeah.
Usually people have just played it casually, but that's okay too.
Well, when
it's
I
just
first started doing the streaming for this channel years ago, before it was called this, well, it was actually I was doing. I think we were doing tower races with Liam, actually, just streaming that for fun.
Hmm.
And I think it was Kamsky came to me, asked me, "Would you like to stream CWT?" And then I started streaming that, and that was back in 2020. And yeah, people were coming on once I started streaming CWT saying, "Oh, I had no idea the depth of this game, the depth and scope. Like, wow, I never knew that these things were possible." It's great when you see people reacting that way.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's fantastic. Oh, and so while we're on that, we wanted to ask you. So, like, you've been hosting some of these in-person events, for Worms. Um, could you tell us about that? And like, is there any possibility about a bigger Worms-based event in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to do something at the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo that unfortunately didn't pan out.
Mhm.
So I kind of put it on pause at that point, especially because among other things, I'm working on the second season of I have a sci-fi comedy audio drama that I release as a free podcast. So I'm currently working on the second season of that. I'm working on the Worms the Director's Cut update. So I've got a lot of things happening right now. So the Armageddon tournament stuff is kind of on the back burner. But with the game now out on consoles, I would love to start arranging regular tournaments. I've spoken to Team 17 or to people at Team 17 about maybe doing some tournaments next year to celebrate the 30th anniversary. And the idea that I have in my head is like a four-round tournament where each round represents Worms in a different decade. So for the 90s, you have Worms the Director's Cut. For the 2000s, you have maybe Worms, Worms 2 Armageddon, or Worms Reloaded, or maybe the Xbox Worms. For the 2010s, maybe Worms Revolution, and then for the 2020s, it would be Worms Armageddon Anniversary Edition, because that's the latest version of the game. So, or maybe throw in a 3D Worms in there, but I don't think that's as fun to watch. So,
Nah.
it's something I would like to do. I'm in Southern California, so there are a lot of conventions that I can get to, but a lot of the big gaming events are things like, there's the Portland Retro Gaming Expo, there's PAX West
Yeah,
up in
I
Seattle.
went to that.
I want to go to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. I got to go. The fact that I'm a big fan of the Classic Tetris World Championship, so I always wanted to go to the Portland Retro Gaming Expo for that. But hearing that, it moved to the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo this year, so I got to be there for that this year,
Nice.
which was really really cool.
I saw that
Um,
like last year, and I didn't know any of the Tetris players, but it was cool. I was like, wow,
it's so good.
these guys know how
My
to Tetris.
My favorite story about the Classic Tetris World Championship, there is a few years ago, 15-year-old boy, I think his name was Joseph Saley. He watches the tournament for the first time. He thinks, that could be fun. I'm going to enter next year. He practices, he enters the
Uh-huh.
tournament, he qualifies, he makes it to the finals, and he unseats the 7-time Classic Tetris World Champion. And then he
Holy
came
shit.
back and did it again the following year. If that happened in boxing, we'd have 3 movies about it by now.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. It's very intense.
I
I love
love it.
the
It's so
tapping
intense.
methods they have.
And the way that the game has changed so much just over the last like 5-6 years, people switching controlling methods like rolling, and you get that.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting when Tetris players discovered rolling. It reminded me of back in the day. There were some ropers who used to roll with their keyboard to like
Yeah.
hit the space bar multiple
Liam.
times.
I want to know who invented finger roll for Worms Armageddon, because like that deserves a video on its own. We have players like Anubis. He was one of the fastest tappers in Worms ever. He just did like a finger roll like this, but he had like
Yeah.
he had like a keyboard where he removed the spacebar and was just tapping on the pure contact,
Hmm.
which
Oh,
maybe is
wow, okay.
dangerous. Maybe that's like not, you might get electrocuted or something. I don't know, but
I don't think you
it
get
seemed to
electric.
work.
It depends on the keyboard, I guess. But yeah, I mean, one
Yeah.
of the I remember I used to, and I still play Rock Band a lot. I love Rock Band.
Yeah.
And there was a company that put out, I think it was Mad Catz actually, put out a bass guitar controller with 2 strum bars and a thumb rest above the strum bar, so you could walk the bass. And I loved that thing. I
That's
almost
cool.
exclusively played bass and vocals. So being able to
Uh-huh.
like hold the guitar and walk the bass, but like to strum really quickly, I love that. I want another controller like that. So having a keyboard like that where you can like roll the space bar or roll, just putting one thumb kind of on the space bar and like rolling underneath, like that's such a great technique. And I wonder how much crossover there would be between people who do rope racing and people who play classic Tetris competitively. I think that would
Well,
be interesting to see kind of the connective tissue there.
Speaking of which, once you receive your ATHE, your Wooten ATHE Mablak, you'll want to try and mess around with the Rappy Snappy, the SOCD technology, because it's like
Seems wild.
if you're doing finger rolling with 2 buttons, when you press one, even if you've got it held down while you press the other, it cancels that out and presses it.
Can I
wild.
just run away? Can I step away for just 1 minute? I'll be
Yeah,
right back.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
I was actually going to say, once Squirminator comes back, because we're down to the last 3 questions, we could do like 1 versus 1. If you'd like to host up a intermediate with you and Squirminator or something.
We could. You know what? I'll just host.
Do I have?
I'm definitely in a situation where it's fine, but I do have my I have my monitor and I just have my camera smack dab in front of my monitor, just covering up part of the screen. I can still see enough though, I think.
I need to actually, so
Intermediate sounds good.
where
It's not a crazy amount of thinking.
where is? There we go. Let me know when you've hosted so that I don't have to sit in anything goes, because there could be any sort of racism or whatever.
That's true. We don't want any of that on stream.
Should I dig out a photo of Squirminator? Yeah. I mean, you said you've got a photo of the bowling session. Maybe he would like to see that.
Interesting, but yeah,
Do it.
wonder how they chose bowling. I feel like wormers would. I can't think of an activity that all wormers would want to do. Maybe like darts, maybe pool.
Well, I like darts.
Yeah.
I like pool.
Darts seems like a wormy kind of thing.
Me and
Or
Liam
just a
both
board
like
game.
pool. Liam used to have a pool table.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah, when I think about like B&G, I think like, it's similar to like bar kind of games like pool, darts, etc. Like it's very precise and aimy. Let's do one of the new terrains. Trying to think, what's the best like new terrain that we've got? So I do have most terrains. Some of these are for Worms Reloaded. I like Tetris. Let's do the Tetris terrain since we talked about Tetris.
Tetris is nice. I like the synthwave. I think the synthwave terrain is my favourite.
I'm trying to think if I may or may not have that one downloaded. Synthwave. Wait, is it the one with like the dolphins and the heads? The that one?
No,
Or is
it's
that's low poly. That's low poly.
yeah, low poly, yeah. That's the one. That's really nice. It's like purple
That one's
colours.
yeah. Right. Well, that one makes me think of it makes me think of vaporwave, which is
Yes.
the more the more like dolphiny aesthetic music.
Hello, welcome back.
Thank you.
So
Glad to be
Black,
here. Long time listener, first time caller.
yeah, Black has hosted up an intermediate with a custom terrain.
Oh, do I have
Because
to
yeah,
worm kit for
because
that, don't I?
no, you don't need worm kit.
Oh,
Does
I don't?
he doesn't, does he? It's only the host
What?
that needs it, is it? Because you're putting it into a PNG, aren't you?
Oh yeah, it's fine.
Yeah,
Cool.
so,
Right,
yeah.
let me fire up.
Because we're down to the last few questions, so I thought a little game of intermediate.
Do you want to send me the join link, or are you just on one of the WormNet
I'm just in
servers?
anything goes. You could just like hop in.
WormNet or community server?
Wormnets.
Okay. Anything goes. There you are.
Okay, just intermediate. This is the NNN version, so clusters are like 2 powered instead of 3 powered. That's it.
Sounds good.
And there are no crates.
Unfortunately.
That doesn't sound very great. Comedy brands.
Let's see.
Right.
This is one of the terrains, because there were like one or two unofficial terrains that I went to the effort of converting for Worms the Director's Cut, and this is one of them.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Very nice. So,
Right, I'm gonna have to...
you're friends with Mark Biaggi, who did voices for the Worms franchise. What can you tell us about that?
Mark is a delightful human being. He's based out of San Diego. I actually just saw Mark. I saw him a couple of weeks ago. There is a very small Doctor Who convention that takes place in San Diego called SD WhoCon, and he's their MC. I actually used to MC that event. He took over after I stepped down. But this is a great start for me. Check that out. That's
I'm
cool.
sorry, I had to.
That's fine.
I had to do it.
That's perfectly good. That's what most of my team. Brilliant. Cool and good, and normal as well.
Yeah.
Boof. Keeping it simple. Yeah, Mark's great. He's a delightful person. He's very high energy. And he worked on. I know that he did voices for Worms 4 Mayhem. He believes he did voices for Worms Armageddon as well. He doesn't know what made it into the game. I spoke to him about this a little bit at San Diego WhoCon, and he was telling me that the voices he remembers doing, weirdly enough, because he's American, he's based in America, he remembers doing like a British, like a Bobby, like a police officer voice, and like a regal kind of royal sounding voice.
Okay, but he doesn't necessarily remember exactly which tracks those were. Like I probably know exactly what what they are, but I can't remember the names of them.
Yes, yeah, and he's pretty sure that he did at least those 2 speech banks for Worms 4 Mayhem. He's credited. I think Moby Games actually credits him as having done the cave worm voices as well. And I asked him about that. He says he has no memory of doing the cave worms. But yeah, it's interesting.
So like when
he gets booked a lot for a lot of very regional British accents, which he does quite well actually. Oh gosh.
I'd love to get into voice acting.
I've done a
sounds
little
fun.
bit of it here or there. I didn't put enough mustard on that shit.
Is so like when did he mention like what the process like they had his voice and they just like pitch shifted up to make it wormy? Was that how it worked?
I think for the most part, I think most of the voices in Worms are pitch shifted. I think there are some exceptions. Like Smooth Babe in Armageddon does not get pitch shifted,
Yeah.
as an example.
Oh yeah.
Who needs
That makes
pitch
sense.
shift when you can go?
Fair point. Fair point. We don't think about it often enough.
It does give an interesting sound to it though, pitch shifting it up.
Well, here's the interesting thing: is that for the original Worms, most of those voices are Andy. Andy's recording those.
Okay. Wait, does that I forget, do those since I have not really played Worms 1 very much, do some of those voice banks go into like Worms 2 and Worms Armageddon?
No, the English voice bank in Worms 2 is about as close as you can get to to the bank that is used in Worms 1, but there are a lot of very key differences.
Okay. Also, we just made it way harder to talk like while playing. It's always difficult.
Good though.
But every like it seems hard because like I remember recently like I wanted to make well, I just wanted to make a little meme of a song that was like in a wormy voice. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take this song. It was just like the intro to Attack on Titan. I wanted to make it wormified, so I just pitch shifted it up, but I couldn't get it to sound right. It just sounded like Cartman or something.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is it's easy to pitch shift on its own now, but like
right.
At the
it
time,
is quite easy.
It wasn't just. I don't think it was just a pitch shift. I think it was a speed shift as well.
That's
that's
the tough part.
Yeah. It's like the old Alvin and the Chipmunks albums. Like they just recorded at half speed and then.
Right. If you even with old technology though, if you speed things up, I believe I think you have to talk slower potentially.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But if you do that, then like there won't be much of a loss of quality if you just speed it up. But if you go the other way, if you try to slow something down, like it will get kind of garbled.
I'm
gonna be honest with you. I don't think I'm gonna win this.
Well, we are up against one of the goats.
It's true.
I usually start off with a pretty devastating, double kill or something.
Well, I'll tell you this: if you want to go ahead and book me now for January after the January or February after the Worms Director's Cut update releases, we'll play Worms the Director's Cut.
Oh yeah,
Ooh.
I like the sound of that.
I would be down to do that.
Set up with that remote access software beforehand. And I'll give you a chance to practice as well. I'll help you get set up with an emulator so you can practice first.
I do need to. I need to make sure that I win 100% of the time.
I want to be the one to take you down a peg, but only at a game I'm good at. Oh boy.
The key. If we play a scheme that I haven't played before, then it's a lot. I'm less likely to win. But
this is what I want Andy to add to Worms the Director's Cut.
Yeah.
I probably could have dropped there, but who knows?
Right.
I did do that's so I actually did an intermediate in-person very, very mini tournament at when I went to Games Done Quick last year. And so there were 4 people, I want to say. Well, so okay, the way it worked was I didn't know I was going to host the tournament, but I got stuck at GDQ. I got snowed in for 2 or 3 extra days. So I just had a sign up sheet, and
was
miraculously
that MagFest?
So,
sorry.
Liam sent some images of the bowling thing, and once you've finished the game, I shall show them on the stream.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. God, I can barely remember any of that. I just remember a lot of walking to and from the train station. Is my
Nice.
overriding memory of that.
This is Worms history here. There haven't been that many Worms meetups, you know. I do like seeing all them documented.
So, 2 more questions to go that we've got written down here. What are your proudest achievements in Worms Armageddon versus other games in the franchise?
I mean, I think my proudest achievement was getting to consult on the console version. I mean, I wasn't there from the beginning. I came to it kind of very late in the game. Oops.
Ooh, nice shot.
Well, I might be about to die, so we'll see. Oh no!
Good shot, though.
So I
Nice
did my
height.
backflip, forgetting entirely that I had also enabled low gravity. But I think one of my biggest the things I'm most proud of is some of the things that I caught in the console version of Worms Armageddon. When they did ask me for feedback, and one of my pieces of feedback, and I'm not gonna claim full credit for this, but
Okay.
they one of the conversations they were having, it was about they were still on the fence about whether or not to release this version on the PC. Okay, GG, because obviously I'm not going to finish this one, and I'm not going to.
Oh, is he going to do it? He's going to do it.
You absolute bastard!
Back, forward.
Brilliant.
Very well done.
Best way to end the game there.
Obviously, I want a rematch.
Back, forward.
Yeah. But yeah, they were still on the fence about whether or not they were going to release it on PC, and the feedback I gave them was don't do that. Because I thought it would split the community. It doesn't have feature parity with the existing PC version. There's no cross-platform play because it would be on Epic Games Store if it had been anywhere. Which I know because there was that leak earlier this year. The Worms Armageddon Anniversary Edition was included in a leak of games in the Epic Games Store database. So it would have been played through the Epic system. It wouldn't have been on WormNet. So, yeah, that was my big concern. And
I'm glad you I'm glad you said that, because that's that would be kind of a weird thing for the community.
Yeah, and I have I have no control over the game. Ultimately, what they do with it is theirs. But I gave them my feedback. I explained to them, why I believed that they shouldn't.
I am really sorry. I really need to nip to the loo quickly, so I'll be back in just 1 minute.
Sounds perfect. Hey, let's take this time to trash talk Como.
Oh yeah.
I think Como's hair is stupid. I think the lights that he has on in the background are dumb.
Yeah, poorly thought out. Come on.
Just really atrocious, just obnoxious. Really, I think is the word I would use to describe it.
Yeah, and I don't like his cat.
Oh, don't get me started on.
Got a real problem with that
Cats.
feline.
I mean, I like cats.
Yeah, but just not his, right?
Not today.
Yeah. I'm wondering if I should blow the barrels or not. I guess
I say no.
I'm gonna go with. But do I hit the top barrel? Is a good question. I feel like I shouldn't hit the top barrel. Nah, I shouldn't have done that.
I personally don't like it. And again, it's your game. You can do what you want with it. But my advice is go all the way straight to Turbo Hell.
Okay. I'll consider that. Also, you got 2 worms totally trapped.
Yeah.
Chew on this. Oh no! Ow! I'll get you. Reinforcements have arrived.
Someone, are you on the Worms the Director's Cut Discord?
I am. I'm not sure if I am.
We have a Discord for it. It's nice. It's just discord.gg/wormsdchq. and that's where
Okay.
Andy and I and the community are kind of planning the update.
Okay.
Someone who did this terrain style, because someone converted this for Worms the Director's Cut very recently, and I think it was the original creator.
I don't know who did. But yeah, this terrain's really nice, and pretty much any food terrain.
King
Yeah, I
Gizzard,
love
yes, thank
any
you.
food terrain. There's like a candy terrain too, which is
Yeah. Well, the
I really
candy
like that one.
terrain, the candy terrain that is currently on the Discord is a recreation of the original. And I think the one that's in here is a recreation of the original as well. But I was able to get
Okay.
the original sprites out of
Right.
out of
Back.
Worms United, and I was able to recreate those for Worms the Director's Cut.
Nice.
Let's
That's
see
good to
what's-
hear because yeah. Yeah, there's like so many custom terrains now. Like I love the fact that it's potentially easier to make custom terrains. It should be just like a really easy thing.
Yeah. Again,
Um
it's super easy to do in Worms the Director's Cut, not to brag or anything, but
no, I want to see how that goes. Cuz it seems like it's like I haven't tried to do it myself in Armageddon, but it seems like there's a few steps, you know, you got to take. So if it's relatively easy, then that is fantastic. I'm trying to think. What should I do? I kind of want to go down here.
So, last question here. Are you a fan of the Worms Armageddon Anniversary Edition that came out recently for consoles?
I think it's spectacular, and I obviously, again, I'm a little biased because I've been playing it for longer than most, and I had a hand in kind of shaping it a little bit in its final form. But I'm really happy with it. It doesn't have feature parity with the PC version. There's no like you can't hold down a button to walk backwards, and it's an older version of the game engine. It's like 3.7 point something point something point
Yeah.
something point something.
It's like only
but-
slightly older.
Yeah. I tested it on a Discord video call with Deadcode, and he was able to identify specifically which version it was based on a bug.
Wow.
That's
That's impressive.
But it's the best way to play Worms on console. Worms Armageddon is still the best way to play Worms on any system that you can, have regular access to. Like, not everyone's going to go and spend £300 on an Amiga 1200 on eBay. Not everyone wants to spend $120 on even an Amiga, the little Amiga 500 Mini. But, are you absolute bastard?
I know I had to.
You piece of garbage.
But now you have no more trapped worms now. They're all free.
Oh, good. Oh, thank you for doing me a solid there. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Love it. So there is a worm kit module called New Wave, and I think I might be one of 4 people who uses it. And all it does is it just swaps out it lets you put custom music on Worms Armageddon. So I have I have the Worms 2 soundtrack playing right now, which for me is the best Worms soundtrack. But
Dude,
I also have
the worms. It's so good.
because I have I also have the gosh dang it. I also have the I'm just gonna do this, I'm running out of time. Because I also have the Worms 2 soundtrack, I was able to take some of the bonus tracks that were cut tracks from Worms 2, add the sound of wind into the background, and add them to the soundtrack.
Oh,
So I have like a
I don't know if I've heard the cut tracks.
I think they're available to download on Dream 17.
Okay. I don't know if I've heard the cut tracks or not. Like, are they like as good as like some of those main tracks?
Got
They
so
have
much,
the same energy. They have the same energy, I will tell you that much.
so much content to go through after this stream. I'll be busy tomorrow, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Paul.
Worms 2, there's the patch. Where is... I thought I had them up here. Maybe they got taken down.
Let's go 3.
Cool, that's fine. I didn't like Pinky anyway.
No, yeah.
Nice knock with the other worm as well down there.
Reinforcements have arrived.
I have never swapped out my music for Armageddon. Typically, I just have the music off, honestly.
Yeah.
But that's partly because I'm usually playing like competitive games. And I need zero distractions.
Yeah.
Even though
That's
I love
me.
Worms music.
The soundtrack is a big part of the vibe for me. That's the only thing
I
I don't
think
like
so.
about Director's Cut is it doesn't have a soundtrack at all. So I usually just put the Worms 2 soundtrack on in the background.
Nice. That's a good choice. Yeah. Worms 2
When I
has
I do that when I
it-
stream it as well.
Oh yeah. Worms 2 is still easily the best soundtrack, I think.
Riot cannon.
It's just like I don't know that 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 main track is, I forget what it's called. It's just so good. But I think one thing that Worms has done consistently is had good music.
Mm-hmm.
Like Worms
I would
WMD
agree.
has some great songs. Reloaded has some good ones. I haven't like found a Worms game that is just like garbage. It's
Yeah.
Revolution has a good one, like that beach level song from Revolution.
Oh,
Just
really?
a nice
Yeah.
little
I'll need to listen
Worms-
to that one, Leon.
The Worms Blast soundtrack is fantastic, and it's basically unlisten-toable if you're not playing the game because it is a dynamic soundtrack that reacts to what is happening in the game.
Wonder if there's a YouTube link
Oh.
for that. Worms
Wait a minute,
2.
is this guy gonna bank or not? Yeah.
Heck no.
Okay, well, what if you went to jail for crimes that I think are
for
illegal,
worm
I think they're
crimes.
illegal. Worm crimes, yeah.
I was wondering what your team weapon was. Good choice.
You know,
Yeah,
I think you
good
got
job.
me.
Yeah, with
yeah, I
the
got you.
grave damage, yeah.
See ya.
Oh, I think you almost got the upper worm too.
Just wait, Buster.
Very nearly.
Like,
See ya.
It's 4-on-3 right now, but 2 of my worms are weak as garbage. Mind you, 2 of yours are as well. I think you're still going to win this because you're you.
it's possible. There's a chance.
One of the things, because they're doing that update for Worms Armageddon Anniversary Edition in January, and one of the things I'm trying to get them to do is put the game flags back in.
Ow. Ow.
Yay!
Oh, you got
You
me.
bastard.
You got me in midair.
Reinforcements have arrived.
Nice
but the
try,
game
though.
flags, yeah.
Yeah, I still have the blerps.
I know I'm not going to win, but I'm going to at least make things look stylish.
Do it. Yeah, he was begging for that.
Ah, Twitch has changed.
Oh, you got 5 worms. You got that 1 worm down there, you bastard.
It's kind of, yeah. I keep my worms safe.
One of my favorite cheats in Worms the
Oh, no,
Director's
I can.
Cut is if one of your worms is named Jesus, he can walk on water.
Wait, really?
Really?
That's
Yes.
I love
We
that's
fucking
amazing.
got him.
Hey, chicken. Another Worms anniversary thing. Oh yeah, we were talking about the Worms Armageddon anniversary release on the console. We'll be wrapping up very soon.
This is not going to work in my favor, but never mind.
Very, very good interview. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, this has been very informative.
Very. And there's
It's been
so
fun
much
being on. Thanks for
content to
having me
go
on.
through. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have everybody on, but there's so much content. I'm looking forward to watching all your YouTube videos, seeing all the work that you've done. Going to be busy this week.
just going through the Worms Director's Cut tips and tricks page, reading all of those articles, it's going to make no sense to you. I mean, some of it might make sense. I mean, no sense to you if you haven't played Worms the Director's Cut. But like, I'm insanely proud of that. To the point where, like, you absolute bastard.
The most useful weapon.
You diabolical mastermind. Good game.
Oh man.
GG.
Good game.
Right, so if you're watching the stream, Ben, we'll show you the pictures that Liam sent over.
Yeah. Oh, please do. Yeah, I've got the stream open right now.
Right, 2 seconds. I am just... So here we go. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it. Keep in mind that there's like a 2 or 3... Oh, there we are. Oh, dear Lord. I was tiny back in the day. Look at me. There's so much neck there as well. Look at that neck. There's Liam, there's Andrew, there's Ewan. I think we had... No, that is a different human being. I have not looked like that in 1,000 years.
Oh man.
Wow. That was not a happy person. Let me tell you, this is my favorite picture. I love this. I made this the wallpaper on my Amiga because I love this so much. I remember walking past this and Andrew making a joke about how everything in Milton Keynes was so meticulously planned that even their garbage is labeled. Love it. But yeah, that was
if it's modeled after an American city, it has to be somewhat dysfunctional, I think.
Yeah. My girlfriend at the time also came with us, and that was the relationship that was not a great one. I would love a do-over of that meetup someday, where we meet up and maybe I'm with my wife who I love. Would be nice, but I think it would be nice to get everyone back together in the same room again.
That'd be amazing. I think Dave himself proposed a meetup, like Chicken, Chuvash, and some other people. I forget. Did that happen or no?
No. That never happened. It was supposed to be.
Yeah. It was kind of just floating an idea, right?
Yeah, it was supposed to be myself, Liam, Chicken, and Dario, but it never fell through. But we'll organise something at some point.
Well,
Dario definitely wants to come over.
I'm just gonna throw this out there.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna throw this out there because I live in LA. Dead Code lives in LA. I know. I met Dead Code and Cyber Shadow. I've met them before. Cool. That was like 10+ years ago now. I'm gonna throw it out there. I think Worms community trip to Disneyland or Universal Studios or something. Obviously, I say that because it's easy for me because I live 15 minutes away from Universal Studios.
Right.
I'll need to save up a while for that one.
get a bunch of us going on the Jurassic World ride.
Can we get a
Super Nintendo Land?
Can we get a kitty going for that?
Yeah, start a GoFundMe.
Yeah. Well, I'm like in that, it's not that bad of a plane ride for me. It's like an hour or something. And I would probably do that. I can't think of that many wormers who are in like the US in general. There used to be a lot more, but everyone, if you go online right now, it's like a lot of people are Russian, a lot of people are European, a lot of people are Polish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm definitely not crossing the pond. I don't think. But I would like to meet up with other wormers. The closest I've ever had to a meetup was like Flamey. He used to, if anyone remembers him, he's done some stuff. He used to be pretty heavily involved in like the First Blood League and some other stuff. But he was like, "Hey, you want to do coffee?" And I was like, "I don't drink coffee." But I don't know. We just somehow missed.
No coffee friends, no coffee buddies.
I was like, but then after I was like, damn it, that's like the one time I've ever almost met a wormer, and I just didn't do it.
Well, you'll have to find it. I mean, the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo is happening here in LA. I think in Pasadena actually. In probably August of next year. So maybe come down for that. That might be fun. I am constantly, because Andy is a huge Doctor Who fan as well, and I've been trying for many years now to convince him to come out to LA for the Doctor Who convention. There's a huge Doctor Who convention that happens here called Gallifrey One that is happening in this February. This February, the guest list is crazy. We got Catherine Tate, we got Jenna Coleman, we got Sylvester McCoy, we got Colin Baker. We've got the current producers of. I'm a huge Doctor Who nerd, so this is very exciting to me.
Okay.
And then because I also some friends and I, we used to do a Doctor Who. We played the Doctor Who role playing game, and we did it as a podcast for a while called the Game of Rassilon. So we do a live show there every year. Yeah, and as you've just mentioned in the chat, Como, we're wrapping up. So if anyone has any final questions, yeah, my girlfriend Amy at the time, who you may remember, Liam, that relationship did not end well because it was not a happy relationship. I think I was maybe doing a good job of hiding that on the day, but yeah, that was that was a bad relationship. I remember. Okay, Liam, I don't remember the Body Blows remix. I do remember the Cannon Fodder remix because it is still to this day on my computer, and I have it in the rotation. It's in my uploads on YouTube Music. Love it.
I love that you mentioned the Cannon Fodder remix, because that was one of the first songs you shared with me, Liam, and that was one of the songs that got us talking about music.
It was
brilliant.
Back in the day on the forum, I had this bug up my butt about they're not making Cannon Fodder 3. I'm gonna make Cannon Fodder 3. So that was the thing I talked about for months, despite the fact that I know nothing about programming, nothing about game development, and so it was just a thing I talked about for 1,000 years and never did anything with. So yeah, that was fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
aren't
not a happy
barriers.
relationship, but it ended, and then I immigrated, and now I'm here, and my wonderful wife Mandy. It makes me very happy, and everything's very good.
Have you got one there, Gregor?
I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I'm not proud of it. I did used to have a blog called Game Journalists Are Incompetent Fuckwits. This is.
Yeah,
I like it already.
Well, it was pre-Gamergate, and I started off with originally it was kind of very light-hearted, and then it got mean, and it started to become a thing. I will admit now that I think a lot of what I was posting at the time was like kind of clout chasing, and it stopped. I stopped having fun with it. I realized that I was not adding anything to the world, and then when Gamergate happened and people started quoting the blog, it's like, I'm nuking this whole thing. I do not want to be associated with that movement.
Right. That did kind of
Yeah.
change the perception of well, yeah, I mean although that whole thing, it wasn't even really about criticizing game journalists. It was just kind of a weird excuse for people to be super misogynistic.
Super duper misogynistic and sexist as well.
So Chicken23's got a question. The work that is being done on the Worms director's cut, is there any way to get more support for Worms Armageddon releases backed by Team 17?
That is a very, very good question. I'm not the person to ask about that because the PC version of Armageddon is very much, that's Dead Code and Cyber Shadow's baby. And I know that they are in contact with Team 17, obviously, because they're officially maintaining a Team 17 game. So I know that those are conversations that happen. I'm close friends with, Ashley Day, Ash at Team 17, who I know is kind of their primary contact as well. So I being in the middle, I hear things from both sides. I know that there's a commitment to Armageddon on both sides, and I know that there is. I'm not the person to ask. I don't know how much I can and can't talk about. I'm confident that there will be forward momentum next year, but I would hesitate to say anything more than that for risk of crossing lines. Even then, I think I might have actually said a little too much. So we'll see.
No.
But I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about the future of Armageddon, not just on the PC and the consoles, but I think next year is going to be a good year for Armageddon, both on the console and on the PC. I think the fact that the console version is about to get the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis versions of the game, of the original game, which were never released outside of Europe, that's huge.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, and again, the update for Worms, the Director's Cut, which I'm working on, I'm very excited with. I don't think crossplay is ever coming, Chicken. If I'm being completely honest with you, I think crossplay, because part of it, I think, is budget and time constraints. It's just how quickly the turnaround was to get this game out the door. But it's simpler to use the Switch's online network for the Switch version and PlayStation's online network for the PS4 and PS5. So the closest you're ever going to get for crossplay is PS4 and PS5 players can play against each other. Xbox One, Series S, and Series X players can play against each other. And that's as crossplay as you're going to get. I don't think you're ever going to see crossplay for the Switch version and the Xbox version, or the PS1, the PS5 version and the Switch version, or whatever. I don't think that's. I would love to see it happen. I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Right, well, sadly. Oh, were you going to say something there, my black?
Nah. Nah.
Well, that'll be us wrapping up. Well, that'll be us wrapping up the stream now. Yeah,
almost 4 hours. That's crazy.
It's been good,
I didn't even
though.
notice the time pass.
It's been good. Took a lot of time to get through those questions. You've been absolutely brilliant, Ben. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing all that. Like, as usual, oh, that's what I was going to say, sorry. To backtrack a moment to Chicken's question. Dead Code did say, remember, that Team 17 gave them gave them the permission to release updates to the community directly now, so that is...
They have a lot more latitude and leeway with what they can release.
Yes. But, hello there, Mark. Dark One in the house.
Oh, what's up, Dark One?
You're just in time to say goodbye.
Yeah, you'll have to catch the whole thing on YouTube. This is a pretty long one. We went through a lot of info about like Worms DC, and my God, we covered a lot.
Yeah, it's been fun. I've had a really great time. Obviously, as more information comes out about Worms the Director's Cut and the new update that's coming out, I look forward to sharing that with all of you. I don't know. I'm hoping to do some more in-person tournaments next year, especially now that the game is out on console. I think being able to do more in-person tournaments will be very much more viable starting next year. But we'll see what happens. I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
Nice.
So the usual. Thank you, Mablack, for being an excellent co-host as usual and driving the conversation with Squirminator.
Of course.
And thank you very much, Squirminator2k, aka Ben Padden, for coming on and sharing his glorious wisdom and talent with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you both here as usual. And thank you to the chat for coming in, keeping us company, and keeping the conversation flowing. So, yeah, I hope you've all had a good night, as have we.
All
right. Peace out, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a good night. Bye.